hate Britain. Patients are waiting 15 hours in A&E. It's a good job we're paying those diversity managers 5 times more than we're paying nurses, isn't it? Get your views coming in to me thick and fast. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Should we stop paying money to terrorist sympathisers? And do you trust Labour on law and order? GBViews at gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says the UK's response to China opening up travel abroad is under review. His comments come after a government spokesperson said there were no plans to introduce mandatory COVID-19 tests for arrivals from China. Beijing announced it would reopen borders next week, and the country's ongoing COVID surge has sparked concern. The US has become the latest country to impose mandatory testing. Ben Wallace says he expects to get some clarification soon.
Well, I think the government has said it's now going to keep that under review and review whether different countries with COVID outbreaks, etc., should obviously face different restrictions. I think as we speak, that is being reviewed, and I'll expect to see some clarification, I think, by the Department of Transport probably today or tomorrow.
Well, the Defence Secretary also insisted UK borders are safe as the military steps in to cover for striking Border Force officials. Unions claim the country's borders are less secure as more than 1,000 immigration officers walk out in a dispute over pay. A senior source has told GB News that passport control operations, though, are running very smoothly at all 6 airports. A third man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of 23-year-old Cody Fisher in Birmingham. The non-league footballer was stabbed to death on Boxing Day in the Crane nightclub, which now faces being shut down. West Midlands Police have said a 22-year-old man has been detained in London. 4 others have been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. And police say a third arrest has been made in connection with the fatal shooting of L. Edwards, killed outside a pub on Christmas Eve in Wirral. Merseyside Police says a 31-year-old man from Tranmere has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. A man and a woman who were previously arrested are still being questioned by officers. Ukraine's military says it's shot down 54 of the 69 missiles fired by Russia in the latest wave of strikes. Air raid sirens were heard across the country, including in the capital, Kyiv. 90% of the western city of Lviv is reported to be without power, affecting public transport and water supplies. Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals if Ukraine continues to make gains in its counter-offensive. That's according to the former head of the British Army. Speaking to GB News, General Lord Richard Dannatt said strategic losses and rapidly falling morale could see the Russian leaders in forced removal. But Lord Dannatt insists it's vital the UK, US and other allies continue to supply Ukraine with Western weapons.
Yes, it's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
The Vatican says former Pope Benedict is in a serious but stable condition after concerns were raised over his health. In a statement, it said the 95-year-old is lucid and had rested well overnight. Yesterday, Pope Francis called for prayers for his predecessor, warning he was very sick. The former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope to stand down in 600 years back in 2013. At least 19 people have been killed and up to 30 are missing following a huge fire at a hotel casino in Cambodia. That's according to police and local media. The blaze started at around midnight on Wednesday at the Grand Diamond City Casino on the border with Thailand. Police say around 400 people were in the building when it caught fire. Authorities are still working to determine the cause of the blaze. And the deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America has killed at least 69 people now, according to local media, and it's now bringing wet and windy weather here to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will see spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. Forecasters have issued an amber weather alert for heavy rain tomorrow for parts of Scotland, warning of flooding and travel disruption. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Patrick.
Yeah, welcome aboard, everybody. Now, a landmark review of the government's anti-terror scheme has shockingly found that taxpayers' cash was handed out to groups promoting Islamist extremism. The review found that funding from the Prevent programme, initially earmarked for charities that steered young Muslims away from terrorism, ended up funding organisations that promoted extreme Islamist ideas. The report, led by the former head of the Charity Commission, William Shawcross, says that these misdirected funds undermine Prevent's ability to effectively undertake counter-radicalisation work. You will not believe some of the shocking detail in this, and I'm going to get stuck right into the middle of it right now. Joining me to analyse this is Anglican priest and commentator Gavin Ashenden. Gavin, thank you very much. Just before I go to you, I want to read a couple of quotes here from the reporting of this report. The report cites 4 examples, including the leader of a Prevent-funded civil society organisation which made public statements favourable and supportive to the Taliban. They had referred to militant Islamist groups prescribed in the UK as legitimate resistance groups and said that Muslim members of the armed forces should refuse orders. Shockingly, though, most shockingly, as if that wasn't enough, serious question marks as to whether or not Prevent deliberately funded these people. Your views?
Well, Lord Shawcross himself says this is such an astonishing thing to happen that either the people who are running Prevent are really incompetent and they can't tell the difference between a benign Islamic group and one that wants to fund terror, or else they're doing it deliberately. So it's very hard to believe that people who've been in this fairly sophisticated game for decades can't tell the difference. And I think you have to assume, until they can refute it, that this is some form of deliberate policy. And part of the problem is that it's put in a context. It's put in a context where people in the administration that run this country have taken some very strange decisions that are, for example, against Christians and for Muslims. And in 2018, we didn't admit a single Christian Syrian. They were all Muslims who were invited in. HPP was refused asylum here in case it provoked the Islamic community. There's an inconsistency here, which looks as though it is more than simply incompetence. And if it is,
do you think, Gavin, just reading between the lines of what you've said there, do you think that we currently live in a country where people would be more inclined to fund radical extremist Islam than ordinary Christianity?
There's no doubt. Well, if we go back to the 2018 issue of bringing in Syrian immigrants, a large number of Christian organizations were saying there are a good number of Syrian Christians. We're a Christian country nominally. Let's give the Syrian Christians asylum here. Not a single one was allowed in by the Home Office. You have to ask, why is that? I mean, what kind of attitude lies behind that sort of public policy? And then you have to say, if that kind of attitude is extended towards the running of Prevent, and you discover they're giving money to organisations that call for setting up a 5th columnist within the army to refuse orders, you have to say that either it's accidental incompetence running through the whole thing, or it's deliberate.
Why would it be deliberate incompetence? Because that would imply to me that we've been infiltrated.
Well, all I'm trying to do at the moment is present the dots. It's for other people to join the dots themselves into a pattern. I'm trying very hard to avoid conspiracy theories. I'm trying hard to avoid the... But the fact is that you have to give respect to Islam. It's a very serious religion, and it has some very powerful, clear-sighted ambitions. And they're political. Islam is half political and half religious. It's a composite way of looking at the life. And we know already that within our Islamic cities, the Islamic communities have quite rightly and understandably made strong efforts to get themselves represented politically. This is not a group of people who take a neutral view as to the place they play in society. They would like any society they would like to live in, they would like it to be an overtly Muslim society. And it would be very strange if they didn't set out to achieve that. They don't make any secret of it. It's just that we, the liberal majority in this country, refuses to take them seriously when they say it.
This is fundamentally supposed to be, anyway, a counter-radicalisation programme, if indeed it emerges that money has been given to people who support the Taliban, who have welcomed extremist preachers into mosques, who believe that members of our armed forces who are Muslim should refuse orders, who think that militant Islamist groups are prescribed in the UK as legitimate resistance groups. And those are facts. If they are facts and they turn out to be facts, then the only solution that I can conclude as to why that wouldn't be published and why that wouldn't be outlined in this report is because, as a source close to Mr Shawcross, the author of this report, says, Home Office officials are terrified of looking like they are picking on Muslims. But facts shouldn't get in the way of anything, should they?
Well, they certainly shouldn't. I mean, that's a more benign interpretation than the one I'm inclined to. They say that they're frightened of Islamophobia. That it may be true, but what's very odd here is that Prevent, which is set up deliberately to deal with global Islamic terrorism in this country, has decided to put the larger proportion of its energies into looking into right-wing extremism. Now, all extremism and terrorism is terrible. It's inhumane and diabolical. It's awful. But it's a fact. You can Google it, that in the last 40 years, 40% of the casualties across the world have been at the hands of
Can I just localise that, Gavin, a bit as well? And it's a good point you've made. I just want to really drill down onto this because I happen to have some numbers in front of me here. The total number of Islamist terror attacks and deaths since 2005 in the UK, 13 attacks, 106 people killed. The total number of far-right terror attacks and deaths since 2005 in the UK, 3 attacks, 3 killed. 35 times more people have been killed by Islamist attacks than far-right attacks in the UK since 2005. Do you find it slightly perplexing, then, that a report will choose to focus on the far-right issue?
Well, I'm not perplexed. I'm worried it's more serious than that, because what you've just described actually is represented across the world. It's nice to know that the balance of terrorism in our country is roughly proportionate to across the world, where you find this great predominance. I mean, you describe me as an Anglican, but I'm a Catholic now, and I have a number of friends who are Catholic bishops in Nigeria, and the devastating murder that's taking place by Islamic tribesmen in Nigeria against Catholic communities is appalling, and no one takes any notice of it. The idea that in our country, where we have people calling for a fifth columnist Islamic group to be set up privately and secretly, and they want to go and look at right-wing terrorism and spend the majority of their resources doing that, it doesn't suggest it's incompetence. It suggests it's strategic. And if it's strategic, that suggests prejudice. And if it's prejudice, we need to expose it for what it is and hold them accountable for it.
Gavin, are you afraid that we are just sleepwalking into a disaster here?
Well, I am. I'll tell you why. I mean, I was very much involved in Islamic and Christian dialogue whilst I was a university lecturer. But I had some friends who were Muslims. And I remember in 2002, one of them said to me, as we were leaving a conference together, "My work is done now. My grandchildren will inherit an Islamic Republic of Great Britain, and here are the demographic figures." And I mean, I was shocked. I went away and I looked at them. And he was exactly right. Demography and democracy means that by 2050, 2060, the majority of people in this country will be Islamic. I'm very sorry to say that what we're dealing with at the moment is the roadmap to how we get there. But we could slow it down a bit, or at least we could make it slightly more benign and restrain the terrorism and the violence by taking responsibility. It is quite incredible to me that we're governed by people who won't do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, natural demographic change is one thing, but actually hurtling towards a situation, or indeed just existing in a situation where taxpayers are funding groups under the guise of stopping extremism, and those groups actively promote extremism, seems quite self-defeating. If the fear element is true and that this report is being redacted not through some kind of, what you said, conspiracy theory, I'm not sure it is, to be honest with you, but deep state interference with this kind of stuff, if indeed it is just out of fear, that fear comes out of British public, the ordinary members of the British public, not being able to see what they see going on before them because they're afraid of being called racist or Islamophobic. But at what point does someone have to grasp the nettle and say, well, here are the results?
But look, we have a duty to our friendly Islamic neighbours, of whom they're the majority. And we have to make sure that they are not tarred by the same brush as the extremists, and that any kind of reaction that this behaviour promotes doesn't damage them. It's Islamic philiac to deal with this properly, because we're defending the vast majority of our Muslim neighbours from the consequences of this. It's not Islamophobic. The idea that it's so nonsensical. First of all, Muslims come from a wide variety of races, so you can't be racist if you're hesitant about Islam. And secondly, they cover a wide variety of different responses to their host communities. Some integrate beautifully and perfectly, and they're absolutely marvellous people and neighbours, and we should protect them. It's not Islamophobic to call people to
it's the
account
radical element of it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Gavin, thank you very, very much. Gavin Ashton there, former Anglican, now Catholic, layman and author. Now, in response to this leaked report about our Prevent scheme, which, if you're just joining us, appears to outline that taxpayers' money earmarked to tackle radicalisation and extremism in this country may well have actually been sent to groups that support the Taliban, radical hate preachers and want members of the armed forces who are Muslim to not follow orders. In response to that, Downing Street have said the review will be published in due course. It remains right that we take the time to prepare and deliver a considered response. We've always said Prevent remains a vital tool for early intervention and safeguarding. Your views on this, ladies and gentlemen, are flying in thick and fast. I always have the inbox in front of me. I always love to hear from you. And today we're going to leave it a little bit more room to breathe when it comes to your views. Sometimes I get criticised for not reading enough out. That's fair enough. We don't always have time. Today we do. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. gbviews@gbnews.uk is that email address. But coming up, should victims of antisocial behaviour choose how perpetrators are punished? That's Labour's idea to get a grip on lawless Britain as they present themselves as the party of law and order. Get a load of that. I'll get the view of political commentator Susan Evans. That's coming next. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instinct was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, wonderful people. Now, that inbox, gbviews at gbnews.uk, has popped off in response to the story that we're leading the last hour with and every single hour throughout the course of the show, which is extremist groups funded by the taxpayer. Allegedly, taxpayers' money has been sent to groups who support the Taliban, who support radical hate preachers and who want members of our armed forces who happen to be Muslim to disobey orders. And the controversy around this, apart from all of it, really, is that supposedly the government doesn't want to publish this report for fear of, you guessed it, offending certain elements of the Muslim community. Well, Pete has been on. If this cowardly government are too scared to name terrorist-supporting entities for fear of a legal challenge, then why can't MPs simply debate them in Parliament? And it's a really interesting point, that, Pete, because they would have parliamentary privilege, wouldn't they? Yes, 100%, I actually agree with you on that one. And a lot of you saying, this is actually too much now. Here we go. This is one from Janet. Thank you very, very much, Janet. Make sure your views keep coming in. Janet says, I'm sick and tired of this. The truth must out. And that's my concern, Janet, which is that people will be too scared of a backlash for the truth to come out. We saw it, didn't we, with grooming gangs. We've seen it left, right and centre, up and down the country. It cannot happen again. But we'll return to this. For now, then, we're moving on, because the victims of antisocial behaviour could choose how offenders are punished under Labour's plans to get a grip on lawless Britain. This is fascinating, actually, and I think I'm in favour of it, but let's just find out. Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reed said prevention will be at the heart of their approach. So shocking stats reveal nearly 2 million reports of antisocial behaviour were just ignored over the past 3 years. Yesterday, I covered that 1 million burglaries had pretty much gone uninvestigated. Anyway, Reed said, under his plans, victims will be able to select the unpaid work that offenders can carry out, so victims will see justice being done. i.e., someone, you know, graffitis your car or something, and they get caught for it, which would be a fine thing, wouldn't it? But they get caught for it, and they get given unpaid work. You might be able to choose what unpaid work they actually do. I don't think I hate this idea. Anyway, to give her view, I'm joined now by journalist and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Suzanne, just before we get stuck into the idea that Labour are now trying to bracket themselves as the party of law and order, which I do think is laughable, this specific thing is quite a good idea, is it not?
Well, I'm not so sure, to be honest. I mean, I could conceive of a situation where you basically have criminals who are treated very unequally because, of course, what each individual victim wants might be very different. But what do you do if you have a victim that says, oh, they've had a terribly tough life, I forgive them, I don't think they should have any punishment whatsoever? What do you do then?
Well,
presumably somebody is then still going to have to come up with a punishment.
Yeah, but isn't justice more about the victim feeling as though justice has been served? And if that victim decides that they feel as though, you know, Toby has had an absolute shocking life, he never met his dad, and it's really set him on a path to criminality, and that they don't want him to have any punishment, then the victim is all square.
Except if you've got another victim in the same circumstances and they think the punishment should be as tough as possible. It just becomes a sort of a postcode lottery, doesn't it? If you're a criminal. Now, OK, you might argue as a criminal you haven't got any rights and you just have to deal with whatever is handed out to you. But I think sentencing has got to be consistent. And my worry is that this isn't going to be consistent. And I think this fundamentally, Patrick, is the problem with what the Labour Party have announced. You know, yesterday they were accusing the government of being obsessed with gimmicks after the figures showed that more than 1 million thefts went unsolved last year. And yes, that is dreadful. But what have we got here now from the Labour Party? Well, I would argue it's another gimmick. This idea about victims choosing unpaid work punishments. You know, they're going to be tough on the crime again and tough on the causes of crime. That was Tony Blair's old slogan. Now they've got a new one: prevent crime, punish criminals, protect victims. It's another great slogan, but there's no real detail. There's no real detail about how this ability for victims to choose these unpaid work punishments is actually going to work. There's not even any agreement or in their proposal about what antisocial behaviour is. They're talking about tackling antisocial behaviour, but what is that? That covers a whole gamut of issues, some of which, of course, such as noise nuisance, are actually enforced by local councils rather than the police.
Yeah, and also they have failed to say how they're going to address the core issue, which is that these antisocial behaviour problems are not even being brought to book in the first place. So there's that. Labour will be on a sticky wicket, will they not, Suzanne, when it comes to trying to bracket themselves as the party of law and order? I don't remember a huge amount of them coming out massively about the old defund the police stuff. I remember a couple of them taking the knee, quite famously. And certainly when it comes to stop and search, well, they don't really want it, do they? How can they be tough on law and order if they want to take the knee, maybe defund the police, and don't think that people who are carrying knives should actually be looked at?
Exactly right. Let's not forget, Keir Starmer himself actually took the knee for George Floyd after his death, which, OK, he didn't deserve to die as he did, but he was, at the end of the day, a violent criminal. But here we are again. How much of this is kind of actual policy making on behalf of the Labour Party, and how much of it is just trying to park their tank on the Conservatives' lawn? We recently had Keir Starmer trying to look tough on immigration. Now he's trying to look tough on law and order. But of course, some of us haven't forgotten that he was Director of Public Prosecution for numerous years and arguably failed in that job in many different ways. He failed to address the grooming gangs issue, something for which he has subsequently apologised. He failed to prosecute or investigate Jimmy Savile. He failed to prosecute serial rapist John Warboys for an additional 75 sexual assaults, in addition to the 12 he was convicted for, which almost led to him being let out of jail. He failed to prosecute doctors who were carrying out abortions on the grounds of sex selection only. A survey of CPS staff at the time that he was DPP suggested that only 12% of them thought he was doing a good job. You could also look at the way in which Labour areas of the country are operating and say, well, actually, Labour's not doing such a good job on crime. You've got London, over 13,000 knife crimes every year. Wales, again, led by a Labour administration. You've got public order offences have gone up some 500% in some parts of the country. Violent and sexual offences up, antisocial behaviours up, drug crime, possession of weapons. And then in Manchester, under Labour Mayor Andy Burnham, the police were put into special measures for 2 years until October this year for failing to record more than 80,000 crimes in 1 year. So their record is not good on this.
No, I get all of that. I do know that Keir Starmer does issue a very robust defence of his time as the head of public prosecutions, head of the CPS. One of my concerns about this, which, frankly, I do think is impossible to get around for the Conservative Party, is that the Conservative Party used to have Conservative values. Some would argue that some of those was to be strong on law and order. When I look at national pictures for England and Wales, where the chance of a suspect being charged is down to 5.4% from 15% 7 years ago. Whilst it's all very well and good highlighting Labour areas there where crime is rampant, the fact is that the Tories have failed when it comes to things like illegal immigration. They've failed when it comes to things like net immigration. They've failed when it comes to handling our economy particularly well. You could argue they've failed over civil liberties during the coronavirus crisis. And frankly, they have failed on law and order. Young people can't get on a housing ladder. All of this stuff. And I'm sorry, but it is looking increasingly like, hear me out on this right now, could things actually get worse under Labour?
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it? I've heard several people say recently that we've actually got a socialist government at the moment. So what's the difference whether you vote Labour or Tory at the next election? Because we're already there. There's sort of an equilibrium between the two, if you like. So could it get worse? Well, obviously, that's something nobody can predict. Who knows if Keir Starmer is genuinely determined to get a handle on immigration, if he's genuinely determined to get a handle on law and order, arguably, that famous phrase, things could get better. But as you say, politics is impossible to predict. And this is the problem, isn't it? Parties come up with their manifesto and they don't cost them. They don't think them through. They come up against problems when they're trying to get legislation through the House that their policies aren't going to work or MPs are going to be against them. So even a brilliant party political manifesto that everyone agrees with could hit the buffers. That's politics for you.
See, it could, but also increasingly in this politics of personality, a little bit like a presidential-style thing. Boris Johnson, of course, absolutely crushed Corbyn. In terms of those two personalities, there was only ever going to be one winner there. Magic Grandpa didn't stand a chance, did he? But when you look at now, Rishi Sunak, a bit bland, to be fair. Keir Starmer, I would argue so wooden that birds nest in him. But actually, if he starts to come up with things like this that at least look good on paper, maybe, just maybe, he will win. Suzanne, thank you very much. I could talk to you all day, but we'll have to leave it there. Suzanne Evans, politician, political commentator. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, as the National Trust warns that extreme weather will become the norm if we don't do more to tackle climate change. Should we be more worried, or is this just more needless scaremongering? I will be joined by the National Trust Climate Change Advisor, Keith Jones, shortly. Keep your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Two big ones right at the top of the show there. Should we stop giving taxpayers' money to extremist groups? And do you trust Labour on law and order? But now it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 3:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says the UK's response to China opening up travel abroad is under review. His comments come after a government spokesperson said there were no plans to introduce mandatory COVID-19 tests for arrivals from China. Beijing announced it would reopen borders next week, and the country's ongoing COVID surge has sparked concern. The US has become the latest country to impose mandatory testing. The Vatican says former Pope Benedict is in a serious but stable condition after concerns were raised over his health. In a statement, it said the 95-year-old had rested well during the night and is lucid and aware. Yesterday, Pope Francis called for prayers for his predecessor, warning he was very sick. In 2013, the former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope to stand down in 600 years. Ukraine's military says it's shot down 54 of the 69 missiles fired by Russia in the latest wave of strikes. Air raid sirens were heard across the country, including in the capital, Kyiv. 90% of the western city of Lviv is reported to be without power, affecting public transport and water supplies. A third man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of 23-year-old Cody Fisher. The non-league footballer was stabbed to death on Boxing Day in a Birmingham nightclub, which now faces being shut down. West Midlands Police says a 22-year-old man has been detained in London. 4 others have been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. And police say a third arrest has been made in connection with the fatal shooting of Elle Edwards, killed outside a pub in Wirral on Christmas Eve. Merseyside Police says a 31-year-old man from Tranmere has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Another man and a woman are still being questioned by officers. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Patrick will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Labour's plan to tackle antisocial behaviour by potentially allowing the victim to basically set the punishment. Right, Paul says, it leaves the victim open to constant abuse from the antisocial friends of the offender. Punishment should always remain with a court of law. Yes, I suppose that could be a situation, couldn't it, actually? They find out what punishment you've given them and they come around to your house and make your life miserable. Michelle says, what if the victim is afraid of the person who commits the crime? They could be afraid of the reprisals. Yes, because a lot of antisocial behaviour might be against your neighbour if they're blasting music out or they turn next door into a drug den or something. I suppose you wouldn't want to maybe make them do a bit of hard graft just in case. Ian says, surely now is the time to bring in boot camps run by ex-SAS and para-veterans, make men out of these unruly street urchins. I am all in favour of more military-style schools for people. I actually really do think that might sort a few of them out. But anyway, there you go. Patrick Christys, Britain, a dark, bleak place. Keep those views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We've spoken about that. We've spoken about the Prevent scheme, allegedly anyway, dishing out a boatload of taxpayers' cash to people who support the Taliban and want members of our armed forces who happen to be Muslims to refuse orders. So the Prevent scheme, it would appear, is working really, really well. We'll talk about that later on. But now it's been a pretty wild year for weather, with several storms battering Britain, 40-degree heat and a recent cold snap bringing ice and snow before Christmas a bit. But should we be worried if weather events like this become the norm? Or is it just weather? Well, the National Trust thinks so, and they've warned that there will be, quote, stark challenges for nature if mitigating steps against climate change are not taken in the UK. Well, I am joined now by the National Trust Climate Change Advisor, Keith Jones. Keith, you're absolutely terrified about the weather, aren't you?
Always have been.
What's the impact then? We need to what? Do more taxes to high heaven, make Greta happy.
We can only scaremongering will only get you so far. We need to show what's possible. That's the thing that everybody needs to know. What can I do? Our decision making is based on evidence. What we're seeing at our properties. That's the single most important thing that we can do. We're seeing things that haven't happened before to nature, and nature isn't in a good place. So this is why we've been doing this review now for 16 years. And so there is a consistency in the message. Also, it's not a new warning. We've been doing this work. We've been issuing reports since 2005 as well.
As you say, you're seeing things you haven't seen before at National Trust properties. So am I. I tried to go and visit one around the Maidenhead area the other week, and I was remarkably staggered, anyway, to learn that I now had to pay per person in my car as opposed to just paying for one car. We turned around and drove off, but I suppose that's one way to combat climate change, isn't it? You'll have fewer people tracing the paths if you essentially charge them to high heaven. But what are you seeing at your National Trust properties? What's the impact of the climate change on the National Trust?
Well, it's a whole litany of impacts. We're seeing everything from wildfire to flooding to overheating to rivers drying up to bats falling out of the air in the middle of the day because they're overheated. There's loads of things that we're seeing across the scale for nature.
OK, so what do we need to do, Keith? Come on, you're in charge now of the government's environmental policy. What needs to happen?
We've got the plans already. They're everywhere. We need to start the doing bit. We should stop talking. We should start doing. And we're not talking about extreme things. We're talking about making space for nature, doing less harmful things to nature. We're not talking about any draconian measures. We're looking at creating a better Britain.
Are you worried that we're going to lose National Trust habitats, I take it, if we don't act now?
It's not specific to National Trust. We're going to see changes in habitats, in species mix all over the world. Specifically, the bit that we're looking after, we're seeing impacts today. We're forming our decision-making based on evidence, what we're seeing at our properties. This is not theoretical. We're seeing stuff happening today.
I'm just wondering, you say you've always been banging on about this. It's not got anything to do with the fact that the National Trust has allegedly, I'm sure you've seen the reports, been taken over by the woke brigade. We all know that the woke brigade care a lot about the environment, don't they? Is this just that?
I've been working in the National Trust this is my 23rd year, based on working on evidence, based on doing the right thing in the right place. That's what we're doing. We're working with everybody. The vision for the National Trust is forever for everyone. That's what we're doing today.
OK, all right. Look, thank you very much, Keith. Keith Jones there, who is the National Trust Climate Change Advisor. What do you make of all of this, ladies and gentlemen? Have you noticed massive changes to the weather? I suppose that there are actually various different changes. Whether or not they're normal or cyclical or that humans have got anything to do with it, I suppose, is another matter. GBViews at gbnews.uk. And talking of that inbox, loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this very issue. Another Keith says, in response to National Trust, Keith, is this the same National Trust which embarked on a self-righteous and deeply patronising woke crusade, obsessively focused on distorted, biased views of British colonialism, slavery and feminism, egregiously neglecting the purposes for which the charity was established? I wonder whether or not this Keith used to work at the National Trust. Anyway, now, not surprisingly, it is climbing on the climate change bandwagon. Look, that particular Keith that we had on from the National Trust there seems like an absolutely lovely bloke and clearly has very passionate views about the environment. And we don't want to lose our National Trust, do we? But one thing I will say, though, is if they've decided to embark on some kind of big woke agenda, which it appears they have, focus on things like colonialism. And yes, by the way, this is a thing. I went to drive into a National Trust car park the other week to go with my family for a walk, and there were 3 of us in the car. And instead of charging us for the car, they wanted to charge us per person in that car. I am not going to pay 60 quid for a walk. I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. We turned around, we drove off, we parked around the corner and we just found another field, as I suspect a lot of people will do. Maybe the National Trust could focus more on its primary security. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. Anyway, there we go. gbviews at gbnews.uk is that email address for you to get in touch. We're covering loads today. We're covering absolutely loads. We have already done the radicalisation stuff. We're going to keep returning to that because extremist groups now, it emerges, may well be being funded by the taxpayer. The Prevent programme, designed to stop radicalisation at source, stop it before it becomes a problem, supposedly has been giving millions of pounds in taxpayers' cash to groups that support the Taliban, radical Islamist preachers and want people who are in our armed forces who happen to be Muslim to turn down orders. The big shocker for this for me, though, apart from all of it, really, is that supposedly the Home Office wants to cover this up because they are afraid of looking like they are picking on Muslims. That's the quote. That's the quote. They wanted to spin this report, supposedly, to make it focus more on the far-right threat, which has been described as out of kilter to the most pressing terror threats in this country. Why do you think that is? A really, really shocking quote here, which the findings raise serious questions about whether Prevent is knowingly taking this approach, i.e. knowingly giving money to groups that support terrorist organisations like the Taliban. That is shocking, if true. We'll dive into that throughout the course of the show. But coming up, isn't it time the BBC stopped apologising for our country's history? Or does the woke BBC now actually hate Britain? Oxford University lecturer Dr Marie Cawthard-Dudar weighs in after the break. Stay tuned.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, more of you have been getting in touch about Labour's plans to tackle antisocial behaviour. Carol says, I don't think the plan will work. By the way, the plan was part of a few different elements of it, but one of the standout bits was if you are the victim of antisocial behaviour, because they're saying that around 2 million cases of antisocial behaviour just went unaccounted for, no one received any punishment, no one was caught, that's in the last year. What they're saying is, we will allow you to choose what unpaid work this person does as punishment. There is definitely a joke to be had in there about the Labour Party allowing people to choose what unpaid Labour people do, but I won't make it. Anyway, Carol says, I don't think the plan will work. I was told community services were a joke. They turn up to clock on, doing an hour or so and then going home. So unless it is properly supervised, then it is pointless. Would you, though, not feel a little bit of personal satisfaction being able to say that that person has to dredge out a canal, or I want them to do sewing or whatever, just something, you know, menial? Right? Maybe you would feel like justice had been served. I suppose the problem for me would be whether or not that person is allowed to choose to not punish them. Because if that's the case, I think that's a problem. Because let's say it's your neighbour who is literally in court over antisocial behaviour against you. I imagine they're not the nicest individuals in the world. I imagine that you probably wouldn't want to make them even angrier, you know, just in case. And so you're probably more inclined to go, oh, no, just let them off. And then no justice gets served. Anyway, Kevin says, my understanding of the plan is that the judge will decide on how many hours unpaid work the criminal will do. He's answering my question. And then the victim might decide that the 200 hours should be gardening for old people or litter picking or cleaning up dog mess in park. Great, good. It's too much dog mess knocking about. I hate it when people leave their dog mess on trees. You know when people do it in the bag and tie it on a tree and leave it there like a poo tree? Yeah? It really... They say, oh, don't worry, I'm coming back for it. You're not coming back for it, Sally. I see you get in your car. Anyway, it's not the time to decide whether or not the victim should actually be punished. It's the judge who should do it. That's another view there. Right, anyway, the BBC, moving on. The BBC is rewriting history to promote a woke agenda. A group of leading historians has warned, something we thought we all knew. The report from History Reclaimed cites multiple examples of what they describe as bias in the national broadcaster's documentaries and accuses the corporation of failing to offer impartiality. To weigh in on this, I am joined now by Oxford University lecturer Dr. Marie Cawthor Dowda. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Now, the BBC, how are they rewriting history, if indeed they are?
So the question is not so much about rewriting history as about the amount of history that is not presented and how, strangely enough, what is not presented is always what could lead us to question the fact that the British Empire was bad. So whenever there is something in history that could lead to a nuanced approach to the imperial past of Britain, this seems to disappear. So I'm not British. I have the immense privilege of being able to gush at things that happen to be British. I think that the BBC has done an amazing job putting British culture to the forefront on the international scene. Now, the trouble is that if the only thing that we hear about Britain is that, well, it used to be an empire and it was very, very bad, people who are not experts in history or who do not have the time to dive deeper into the matter will only have a one-sided approach to Britain's past.
Well, that's the thing, and I'm very concerned about this. If the BBC is a representation of Britain on the world stage, which it is, then clearly most people in Britain would not want that representation to be one of a horrific past. And some of the programmes highlighted, apparently, in this report are The Misadventures of Romesh Ranganathan, in which the comedian... Questions why he's there anyway. The comedian visits Freetown in Sierra Leone and discusses Britain's role in the slave trade without mentioning that the city is called Freetown because it was the destination of freed slaves and was set up by the British. And is it just a willful ignorance here to do Britain down?
Well, I'm not in these people's minds. I can't say whether it's a willful ignorance or not. What I can see is that it is not visible on the programme. So there were amazing things going on between, well, during the early 19th century in Sierra Leone, and the way that, in fact, the British fleet has done so much, for instance, to free about 150,000 slaves from the trade that was going on around Africa, would have been a very interesting point to make at that on that topic. Mm-hmm. Now, there's something that also seems to always disappear from the history of Africa when it's done through these channels. It is that Africans were also involved in slave trade. It was something that was commonly done, not just in Africa, but also in Asia and many different civilizations. And we never get that part of the story, which ends up giving the idea that Africa was sort of blank slate, the people with noble savages who didn't know any better. And it hides over the fact that there were powerful empires trading slaves and gold and who were making good money trading with white people who were indeed sailing towards Jamaica or towards America. So it's just about having a broader understanding of these matters and understanding why certain individuals at that stage of history found it like a good way to make money, whether they were white or black.
Yeah, and with that comes a very one-sided interpretation of history. And I am seeing something increasingly happening now, especially on the BBC, which is in relation to historic figures like Winston Churchill. And Churchill, well, Lord Roberts, who's the author and broadcaster, actually went as far as to accuse the BBC of pursuing a fatwa against Winston Churchill. I'm not sure I would quite go that far myself, although I appreciate the point that he's making here. But why is it, do you think, that there seems to be almost a fashionable approach now to, at all costs, highlighting the negatives as opposed to actually highlighting the positives? Almost like it's too introspective.
But I think we approach these things as though we could pin everything that went wrong onto one specific person. So it's very easy to scapegoat Churchill and making him responsible for everything that went wrong, even the climate or the fact that Japan had made some of the trade, the rice trade, impossible around India when he was in charge. And he becomes responsible of these things while it's quite obvious that an individual is not the only responsible for things like that, because there was a whole government around him. There were people who were trying their best with the knowledge of the situation to alleviate what was going wrong in India. And indeed they did. If we look into the documents, Britain did a lot to make it, well, less hard than it would have been if India was just left to the dire circumstances of the climate and the warfare going around because of the Second World War. So making Churchill responsible is very easy because he happens to be a dead white man. And nowadays it's as though everything that went wrong in history is the fault of dead white men. And we forget about all the other people who were involved in history and who happened not to be white or not to be men. And it ends up being just more of the same while it pretends to be quirky, paradoxical, decolonialist, etc. It still happens to be the history of dead white men. But just instead of saying that they're all good, we say they're all bad. Now, all what needed is a more nuanced...
Just quickly on that point. Now, there is the issue of historical accuracy, journalistic accuracy, etc., etc. I get that. I think there is also the issue of subtle indoctrination and the impact that that might have on wider society. If people are seeing things presented as absolute fact, and maybe they don't know everything about a topic, and they are just seeing that Winston Churchill is a war criminal who starved a load of Indian people to death, or that the English decided that they wanted to essentially starve out all the Irish and exterminate them like rats, and that you see that, you know, we are built on a slave trading nation and that it was only us doing the slave trade, for example, and we keep seeing all of this stuff. Can that not have an impact on wider society?
Well, it does have a huge impact, which is a massive amount of self-hatred. So when we only focus on the bad parts of the past, we lose everything that could make us just look at the past together as a period where individuals were making good decisions and bad decisions and just trying their best. But we just pose ourselves as though we knew best with this sort of presentialism, as though what we knew now was already available then, and people then were able to deal with the situation with the hindsight that we have now. It's extremely arrogant in a way to say that we are capable of doing these things and therefore so should they. They should have done better. We can and we ought to learn from the past, but nowadays what we see is that the past of Britain is just a reason to hate Britain. And how would that feel for someone who does not happen to be, well, let's say, your average white British? Am I, as a foreigner, supposed to think that everyone around me who happens to be white British is deeply evil and biased against me and just plotting to murder me or me die of starvation? It's more complicated than that. Well, Britain is much more diverse than the other society I've lived in, and giving us a broader and in a way, well, not neutral, because I'm not sure neutrality could exist in that matter, but at least a balanced view of history could help people at least understand that, yes, things were complicated.
I hope to one day be as eloquent as you are. Thank you very much for picking your way through this particular minefield. I really appreciate it. It's Dr. Marie Calthorpe-Dowder there, who is of Oxford University and reacting to reports today anyway that the BBC is supposedly going for woke in rewriting British history. You are with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, we'll have more on that shocking revelation that the taxpayer has been funding Islamist extremism. But before that, it is your weather.
Hello there, I'm Claire Nazir with your weather update. A rain warning has been issued for Northern Ireland and Scotland overnight, with a focused amber warning So a higher risk of some high rainfall totals across southern Scotland, a snow and ice warning also for central and northern areas of Scotland. Now, low pressure clears to the north of the UK, whilst another one moves in from the Atlantic, allowing for some wet weather overnight, hence the reason why there have been warnings issued. So through the evening and overnight, cold across the central and northern areas of Scotland, watch out for ice, and a chilly night across eastern counties as more cloud arrives from the west. But look at this rain, it will be heavy, and it's tracking in quickly across Northern Ireland, Scotland, clipping the far north of England as well as the Isle of Man. Winds then will pick up to severe gale force across the North Channel, the far north of Irish Sea coast. Gales elsewhere associated with this rain across England and Wales, which again will track swiftly eastwards. So a wet and windy start to the day. Watch out for surface water issues. Obviously some heavy bursts likely, but it will clear towards the east. In its wake, a few showers across Scotland, certainly for Northern Ireland as well. Still snow above around 200 metres, and we'll see a few running in across England and Wales, but here's some drier skies to end the day and blustery rather than those gales. Temperatures then on the mild side in the south, but still cold in the north, 6 or 7 degrees Celsius. Now through Friday evening, a legacy of showers continues across northern England, southern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. That rain continues also across the far north of Scotland for Shetland and Orkney, but it will clear. And then more persistent bursts of rain arrive from the southwest into the early hours of New Year's Eve. So some sporadic bursts of rain arriving and pushing ever northeastwards as we head through the day on Saturday. This rain again could be heavy in places. Again, the winds will pick up, gales along the coast. But we could see some showers just later across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. All in all, an unsettled end to 2023. More rain on New Year's Day across more southern and eastern areas, drier on Monday.
Welcome back. It's just gone at 4 p.m. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. I'll bring you more on that story that I went absolutely massive on yesterday. Taxpayers are funding people who support the Taliban, banned Islamist groups and radical Muslim hate preachers. A leaked version of the Prevent report reveals. The Labour Party, they want to let victims of crime decide the perpetrator's punishment. They say they're now the party of law and order. Is that really true? The woke BBC, as we've just been hearing, is rewriting history. One commentator has even accused them of putting a fatwa on Winston Churchill. Does the BBC hate Britain? Patients are waiting 15 hours in A&E. It's a good job we're paying those diversity managers 5 times more than we're paying a nurse, isn't it? Get your views coming in thick and fast, as indeed loads of you have. I promise you I will make the time today to get to as many of those as I possibly could. Should we stop paying money to terrorist sympathisers? And do you trust Labour on law and order? Also, why not lob this in there for good measure? It's the BBC too woke. GB Views at gbnews.uk, but now it's your latest headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 4. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says the UK's response to China opening up travel abroad is under review. His comments come after a government spokesman said there were no plans to introduce mandatory COVID-19 tests for arrivals from China. Beijing announced it would reopen borders next week, and the country's ongoing COVID surge has sparked concern. The US has become the latest country to impose mandatory testing, while Ben Wallace says he expects to get some clarification soon.
Well, I think the government has said it's now going to keep that under review and review whether different countries with COVID outbreaks, etc., should obviously face different restrictions. I think as we speak, that is being reviewed, and I'll expect to see some clarification, I think, by the Department of Transport probably today or tomorrow.
While the Defence Secretary also insisted UK borders are safe as the military steps in to cover for striking Border Force officials. Unions claim the country's borders are less secure as more than 1,000 immigration officers walk out in a dispute over pay. A senior source has told GB News that passport control operations are running very smoothly at all 6 airports. A third man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of 23-year-old Cody Fisher in Birmingham. The non-league footballer was stabbed to death on Boxing Day in the Crane nightclub, which now faces being shut down. West Midlands Police have said a 22-year-old man has been detained in London. 4 others have been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Police say a third arrest has been made in connection with the fatal shooting of Elle Edwards, killed outside a pub on Christmas Eve in Wirral. Merseyside Police says a 31-year-old man from Tranmere has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. A man and a woman who were previously arrested are still being questioned by officers. Belarus has called for Ukraine to investigate after one of its air defence missiles was fired over its territory. Belarus's defence says it's brought down a Ukrainian S-300 missile, summoning Ukraine's ambassador to investigate to prevent it from happening again. It comes on the day of one of the largest Russian strikes since the start of the war. Ukraine says it shot down 54 of the 69 Russian missiles fired in the country, which has reportedly left 90% of the western city of Lviv without power. Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals if Ukraine continues to make gains in its counter-offensive. That's according to the former head of the British Army. Speaking to GB News, General Lord Richard Dannett said strategic losses of rapidly falling morale could see the Russian leaders enforced removal. But Lord Dannett insists it's vital the UK, US and other allies continue to supply Ukraine with Western weapons.
It's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
The Vatican says former Pope Benedict is in a serious but stable condition after concerns were raised over his health. In a statement, it said the 95-year-old is lucid and has rested well overnight. Yesterday, Pope Francis called for prayers for his predecessor, warning he was very sick. The former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope to stand down in 600 years in 2013. Now, at least 19 people have been killed and up to 30 are still missing following a huge fire at a hotel casino in Cambodia. That's according to police and local media. The blaze started at around midnight on Wednesday at the Grand Diamond City Casino on the border with Thailand. Police say around 400 people were in the building when it caught fire. Authorities are still working to determine the cause of the blaze. The deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 69 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will see spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. Forecasters have issued an amber weather alert for heavy rain tomorrow for parts of Scotland, warning of flooding and travel disruption. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, as we've been discussing, a review into the government's Prevent programme has found taxpayers' money has been handed to groups promoting Islamist extremism. The review, led by William Shawcross, found that individuals who have allegedly supported the Taliban, defended militant Islamist groups banned in the UK and hosted hate preachers are amongst those who've received taxpayers' money. Apparently, as well, some of them decided that we should have Muslim people in our army who refuse to follow orders. Anyway, to give his thoughts on this is the former National Counter-Terrorism Coordinator, Nick Aldworth. Nick, thank you very, very much. The public have a right to know, surely, exactly where this money was sent to, how much money was sent there, and why on earth it was sent there.
I completely agree. I mean, public taxpayers have a right to know how all of their money is spent and whatever, thematic that the government is using it for. I think it's worth mentioning that, this is a review that was commissioned by the government itself. And so I would hate for anybody to think that there's not transparency around this. Prevent, from the day that it was incepted, has had a number of reputational challenges around it. But I would say that on the greater balance, it is an incredibly good programme and is a vital part of our overall counter-terrorism strategy.
My concern, just quickly, my concern on what you've just said there is that the only reason we know any of this is because it's been leaked. The government allegedly are trying to cover this up because they are, quote, terrified of looking like they're picking on Muslims. And the report itself, apparently, has been deliberately skewed to focus more on far-right terrorism than Islamist extremism, despite the fact there have been 35 times more people killed as a result of Islamist extremism in the UK since 2005 than from far-right
So I don't think
terrorism.
So I think, in fairness, you know, I haven't seen the report, so I don't know whether it's skewed or not. But I think what you've just alluded to is the suggestion inside the leaked report that the Prevent programme has been skewed more towards right-wing rather than the report has been skewed towards the right-wing. Now, I can't authoritatively comment on that, but what we do know is that the number of referrals from the extreme right wing into the Prevent programme has parity with those from Islamist extremist concerns. Now, you're absolutely right. By a country mile, the Islamist extremist threat is the greatest terrorist threat that this country faces. That's been advocated and articulated, rather, several times by the head of MI5 and the head of counter-terrorism policing. So nobody's hiding away from that fact. And I'm not here to defend the government or speak on their behalf. But in fairness, you know, if they wanted to hide a report, there's been plenty of other opportunities in recent months to release it at a time when it would probably get lost in the foray of...
I get that. I get that. There's a lot to unpack here. One of the reasons why supposedly they want to redact the names of some of these groups who have allegedly done things like, and I'm quoting here now, actively supported the Taliban, urged Muslim members of the armed forces to refuse orders, been very favourable towards hateful rhetoric from radical Islamist preachers, is because they wouldn't want to offend those groups or face potential legal action. I know very prominent cases where we didn't want to offend certain groups of Muslims, i.e. the grooming gang scandals that were taking place right across this country. Why are we so afraid of offending them?
So we should be exercising policing, and that's what I speak on, without fear or favour. And, you know, I'm confident that that happens. I think individuals sometimes feel self-conscious about approaching or being in the middle of issues that are clearly, you know, have the potential to be inflammatory or create tensions. And I was listening, obviously, to your previous interview. And those are very much the same sort of subjects that people still get a bit nervous around. But what we have to focus on, Patrick, is the systems, and make sure that the systems are fair and exercised without fear. Individuals will always, you know, make mistakes, but the system needs to be prescribed and structured so that it focuses on what it's meant to do, which is to prevent people from becoming radicalised and becoming terrorists, whatever that ideology is.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you coming on and, you know, giving very, very strong words on all of this. And my concern, apart from all of it, really, to be fair, but one of my concerns would be whether or not this money has been deliberately sent to groups that promote things like radical Islam. That is a question being raised by an individual apparently very close to the author of this report. Do you think there is any chance that people who are working in the distribution of funds for the Prevent scheme will have deliberately given money to groups knowing that they, well, for example, support the Taliban?
So I would hope not, but of course, you know, our government allegiances change quite often, and you know, barely more than a couple of years ago, most Western governments withdrew from Afghanistan in the belief that the Taliban had mended their ways and were going to become a legitimate government. So I think some of this needs to be looked at in the context of, you know, when this is supposed to have happened, but also to reflect on the fact that, unfortunately, sometimes to resolve terrorism, you have to engage in a dialogue. And of course, that's what we did with the Irish Republican Army and successfully brought, to a greater extent, peace in Northern Ireland. But again, I'm hypothesising and greatly speculating on why money might have been given to people, or indeed, for that matter, if it has been As I say, I've not seen the report. I look forward to seeing it. We've been waiting for it for a long time. And I think, that would be the one criticism I would have of government on this matter, is that, this is a really important review around a really important subject. We need to get rid of any errors in the programme and get it working properly, and so that everybody has confidence in it.
Can I just pick your brains as your capacity as the former National Counter-Terrorism Coordinator? Massive gig, that. Massive job. You're a chap in the know. Were there ever discussions about the fact that it might be easier to sweep some elements of radical Islamism in the UK under the rug for fear of stoking racial tensions? Was that ever discussed?
Never. Never in policing, and I can't speak for any other body or agency. I find it extremely unlikely. And when you look at how some of the terrorist investigations were managed, certainly over my time, 2017, 2018, we were arresting great swathes of people to get to the bottom of individuals who had committed offences or were planning on committing offences. And indeed, all of those matters were then looked at the independent reviewer for terrorism. In my days, Sir David Lord Anderson, and those actions were found to be legitimate. My view of terrorism policing is that is definitely executed without fear or favour.
Good stuff. Look, thank you very much. Real pleasure to have you on the show, and I hope you had a wonderful Christmas with you and yours. Former National Counter-Terrorism Coordinator Nick Aldworth there, just reacting to this news. Shocking news as it is, and we do all await this report with bated breath, and I will be picking over it word by word, which appears to indicate anyway that millions of pounds in taxpayers' money from the Prevent scheme was actually sent to groups who supported the Taliban, promoted radical Islamist extremism in the UK, and even wanted Muslim members of our armed forces to refuse orders. How on earth was that allowed to happen? If indeed it did happen, although it seems pretty cast iron anyway that it did. We'll have to wait and see. But yes, I mean, the big one for me there is the massive question that's coming out in this report now, which is whether or not Prevent knowingly did that. And if they did do that, why? You are with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, as Labour says, it would allow victims of antisocial behaviour to choose how offenders are punished. Is it that good justice, or actually is it just a pointless gimmick? I want to know. I take on not one, but two left-wingers. Oh, grief. Former Labour advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire, and former editor of Labour List Peter Edwards. Don't say we don't offer a little bit of balance here on GB News. I'll be back after the break.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel. Welcome back, everybody. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on those reports that anti-radicalisation money ended up going to people who, well, radicalised people. So there we go. Eileen has been on. Oh no, here we go. I've upset Eileen. Come on, Eileen. Anyway, I usually like you, Patrick, but you're stirring up trouble where there may be no substance. I know many lovely Muslim people who might be insulted by the things you're talking about. Eileen, I'm happy to come back on that. Don't worry. Yes, one of my major concerns, actually, is that by not publishing everything that there clearly is in this report into the Prevent scheme, that actually it might drag in nice, well-meaning members of the Muslim community, of which there are millions in the United Kingdom, and help to tarnish them with the same brush as people who are promoters of radical extremism. I think the details need to be out there, because if it looks like a cover-up, Eileen, which, to be honest with you, at the moment it is starting to have the whiff of, then I think that will do more harm than good. My other concern, Eileen, is with this idea of, and I'm quoting now from a source very close to the author of this report. We all know what that really means, don't we? He says the Home Office officials are terrified of looking like they are picking on Muslims. Now, I feel, Eileen, like we might have been here before a little bit with some issues, for example, the grooming gang issues, etc. I do think that it needs to be raised that the far right is on the rise, absolutely, unequivocally. But many people could be forgiven, Eileen, I think, for thinking that the more pressing matter, certainly when it comes to active loss of life and active violent terror attacks, could, well, on a larger scale, is maybe down the Islamist route. And that's just based off the numbers. And I am concerned that maybe people are too afraid of raising the issue to, well, actually raise the issue. And that's one of my issues with it. So, Eileen, I hope you don't think I'm doing anything to stir up hate. I am just deeply sceptical that the truth will ever out, and I want the truth to out. So there you go. I hope that's answered your questions, Eileen. Anyway, right, we're moving on. Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reed has said that a Labour government would allow victims of antisocial behaviour to choose how offenders are punished. This will be an update on Tony Blair's tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime slogan, and put prevention at the heart of their approach. I am joined now by two Labour stalwarts, former Labour advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire, and former editor of Labour List is Peter Edwards. I am massively outnumbered here. This is a stitch-up of epic proportions. Peter, I will start with you, my good man. What do you make of this? Do you think this is good justice, the idea that the Labour Party now might let me decide exactly how the chap who graffitied my car is, what kind of manual labour he's been made to do?
Well, yeah, I think it's about giving victims a voice in the justice system. And apart from conviction rates, especially on sexual offences, the idea that with fewer police numbers, victims don't get heard and their crimes don't get the attention and scrutiny they deserve is one of the worries about 10 years of austerity. So trying to put victims at the heart of community-led punishments is entirely sensible. Of course, there'll be one or two practical limitations on it, but it shows Labour is kind of once again responding to public opinion on this kind of core issue.
Scarlett, I think it was just yesterday, actually, the Labour Party accused the Tories of going after gimmicky politics. Is this just a gimmick?
I don't think there's anything gimmicky about this. I think antisocial behaviour is one of the most prevalent crimes there is. There are 2 million instances of antisocial behaviour that are not even followed up. That is what most people see most of the time. I mean, you know, there are very few burglaries. There aren't even that many muggings, even though we hear a lot about it. Very, very few murders. But actually, antisocial behaviour is everywhere. And what we've got to do is we've got to stop it. And what they're what they're doing is it's a very Tony Blair approach. They're saying we're going to be tough on it. We're going to do something about it. But actually, what we want to do is we want to stop it, and we want to stop the people who are doing it. And they come from the community. So let's let the community say what they should be doing.
I get that, Scarlett. I will come back to you, Peter. I'll throw it your way now. Labour obviously want to be branded now as the party that's good and strong on law and order. With absolute respect, as annoying as a neighbour who plays really loud music through my window might be, I probably would care more about the unrelenting stabathon on the streets of London or the West Midlands or Manchester or Liverpool. And on that, when it comes to some Labour Party views on things like stop and search, I don't see how you can be bracketed as the party that's tough on law and order.
Well, I think you threw in a lot there. I wouldn't say there's an unrelenting stabathon in London. I wouldn't use those words at all. But clearly there's a concern over violent crime in London. I wouldn't doubt that for a moment. Where we are, antisocial behaviour, I think it's a lot more than loud music. You know, it might be the single parent who's terrified by a gang of yobs. It might be the shopkeeper that's having racist abuse or worse hurled at him in the street, and so on and so on. So, you know, so I think we've got to be clear about antisocial behaviour. It's not a one-off for something that's annoying. It can make lives misery. And while I think this is, in a sense, admirably devoid of party politics, it's clear that antisocial behaviour, what used to be called, perhaps wrongly, low-level crime, is at the core of the concerns of non-aligned voters, just like welfare and immigration, because it's the absolute antithesis of the Westminster bubble. It's lives being wrecked by bad behaviour.
Yeah, and the grassroots stuff, I think, is important. When people feel like that's been lost and everything else has maybe been lost as well. Scarlett, I'll just kind of ask a similar question to you, which is this broader picture about Labour being tough on law and order. I can't help but feel as though when you see the leader of the Labour Party do things like taking the knee, it's not a great look. I find those two things quite hard to marry up.
Well, I think being against racism is not being against law and order, and that's what he was doing. He was making... Patrick, he was making a stand saying absolutely where the Labour Party stands on racism, right? But I do think, I mean, law and order is incredibly important, and it always has been to the Labour Party. And you know, it was Tony Blair who fashioned the thing, you know, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. And actually, that's been a mantra of the Labour Party. For nearly 30 years now. It is really important, but we have to move on. We have to understand what's going on. And actually, as I keep saying, for most people, what is called antisocial behaviour or low-level crime is what absolutely dogs their lives. It isn't terribly tragic, but not happens a lot. Knifing, right? It is antisocial behaviour, and people's lives are made an absolute misery through it.
OK. Peter, various different Labour-run areas, I suppose you could say, Manchester, Andy Burnham, we've got Wales, etc. Crime's not been handled exceptionally well there. Is there much evidence to suggest that Labour would actually do a better job of handling crime in this country?
I think surely money is at the heart of this. It's very difficult to compare different parts of the UK because they're run in different ways. You know, London being a classic example.
Labour mayor.
Yeah, but they're run and funded with different types of police forces. So I don't think really comparable. And of course, things like poverty play a part as well. But, you know, very briefly, you know, what are the driving factors of high crime and low conviction rates? It's austerity, but it's also closing police stations, it's delays in the criminal justice system, and perhaps occasionally the misallocation of police resources. And these are ultimately
the
political decisions.
The nuclear family, some would say, as well, to be fair. I think fatherless homes have a lot to do with it, I must say. I really do, actually, when it comes to things like that. Scarlett, I'll give the final word over to you on this. And
Patrick, hold on. There are no statistics saying that children from fatherless homes are more likely to be criminals. I mean, let's not start saying that single mothers can't bring up children really well.
Wow,
right?
That's a massive exaggeration on what I've said. There are stats. I don't have them in front of me right now, but I've reported on it before, and I will happily get them and produce them a little bit later on, actually, because there are stats when it comes to the problems. They're just the societal problems it can relate. I'm absolutely not having a go at the mothers, bless them. They do a tremendous tremendous job under incredibly difficult circumstances. Final word to you on this, Scarlett, which is maybe a point of agreement here, actually. I think when you look at the figures about antisocial behaviour, 2 million or so cases not getting looked at, burglary, I mean, you can just burgle willy-nilly these days, it appears, conviction rates or charges down to about 5.4%. It does look as though the Tories have left a massive open door for the Labour Party to walk straight through and say, well, things can only get better under us.
Absolutely, and what we do need more police on our streets. I mean, Peter's right. I mean, it does come down to, are you serious about sorting out crime? And if you are, you have to put some money into it.
Both of you, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. There you go, fantastic. And I was going to say I'm a rose between two thorns. I'm more of a thorn between two big red roses, aren't I? Thank you very much, both of you. That's former Labour advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire, former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards as well. Good chat, I thought. Good chat, people. Right, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this very issue, actually. Angela says, oh, gosh, here we go. Angela's on. I wouldn't trust... Get Peter out before he hears this. I wouldn't trust Labour to clean my toilet, never mind run the country, with the Conservatives not far behind. Look, to be honest with you, Angela, I get what you mean, don't get me wrong, but when it comes... I hate to say this, I'm coming round to the idea that when you look at the crime rates at the minute, have the Tories done a good job of bringing down crime? They've absolutely castrated our police force when it comes to numbers. You know, they're now trying to recruit basically the same amount of people that they asked. They've closed a load of police stations, so there's nowhere to put the new recruits, even if we do get them. Crime rates are absolutely spiralling. I mean, to be fair, the Conservatives have not done a good job when it comes to law and order. It remains to be seen, of course, if Labour could do any better. Roger says very quickly, antisocial behaviour plans by Labour are just another cynical attempt to be relevant. Broken Britain cannot be fixed with political gesturing. British society requires root and branch reform. It is in free fall and will eventually break down into anarchy. OK, well, maybe what's being proposed here is desperately trying to stop us breaking down into anarchy, Roger, but we'll have to wait and see. I do agree with you, though, that I think we're in a position right now where a lot of structural reform is needed. You're with me, Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, who's to blame for queues of up to 15 hours at A&E, bed blockers, flu, or perhaps lockdowns? Oh, I know. We can't let it go, can we? But first, it's your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says the UK's response to China opening up travel abroad is under review. His comments come after a government spokesperson said there were no plans to introduce mandatory COVID-19 tests for arrivals from China. Beijing announced it would reopen borders next week, and the country's ongoing COVID surge has sparked concern. The US has become the latest country to impose mandatory testing. Belarus has called for Ukraine to investigate after one of its air defence missiles was fired over its territory. Belarus's defence says it's brought down a Ukrainian S-300 missile, summoning Ukraine's ambassador to investigate to prevent it happening again. It comes on the day of one of the largest Russian strikes since the start of the war. Ukraine says it shot down 54 of 69 Russian missiles fired in the country, which has reportedly left 90% of the western city of Lviv without power. A third man has been arrested on the suspicion of the murder of 23-year-old Cody Fisher. The non-league footballer was stabbed to death on Boxing Day in a Birmingham nightclub, which now faces being shut down. West Midlands Police says a 22-year-old man has been detained in London. 4 others have been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Police say a third arrest has been made in connection with the fatal shooting of Elle Edwards, killed outside a pub in Wirral on Christmas Eve. Merseyside Police says a 31-year-old man from Tranmere has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Another man and a woman are still being questioned by officers. The deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 69 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will see spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. Forecasters have issued an amber weather alert for heavy rain tomorrow for parts of Scotland, warning of flooding and travel disruption. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, patients seeking emergency care in parts of England are being forced to wait 15 hours on average for treatment in A&E or for an ambulance. Hospital bosses have responded by blaming a combination of bed blockers, COVID and flu, and several NHS trusts have declared critical incidents, which means they are struggling to provide safe care. To break all of this down now for us is GP at Same Day Doctor, Dr. Lawrence Gurlis. Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, thank you very, very much. So waiting 15 hours in A&E is an absolute monstrosity. Why is this really happening?
Well, I think to some extent what the NHS has said is true. I mean, we've been overwhelmed. I've just been working 10 days in a row non-stop, dealing with coughs, colds, COVID, flu, chickenpox, sinusitis. It's been the worst winter that I can remember. I remember saying the last 2 winters I wasn't seeing any of this because we were in lockdown. And it's we do have this immunity deficit we've built up. I know it sounds controversial, but there's no doubt it's true. We were all locked down for 2 winters. We are getting 2 or 3 times more of these infections. Almost everyone you meet, everyone you talk to has some sort of respiratory infection. So to me, that's the number one cause of all this. Secondly, add to that, we always have a winter crisis anyway, because the NHS works at 99% capacity, so there's no spare capacity in the winter. Thirdly, we do have a breakdown in social care, so that bed blocking means you can't discharge patients from hospital. So I think all those excuses actually are perfectly valid. And when I look at social media today, I can see the system, even everyone now admits the system is broken. It's not breaking down. It has broken. This is it. This is the point that we said would happen. The system has totally broken down. You can't get an ambulance. Patients waiting 12 hours in A&E. It's pretty, and it saddens me to say this. It doesn't please me at all, even though I'm not in the NHS anymore. It saddens me enormously because I believe in the principles of the NHS.
Yeah, but do we have to wake up now and realise that significant, serious root and branch reform is needed and maybe slaughter what was once a sacred cow that has turned into a fatted calf?
Yes, we do, Patrick, without a doubt. But I don't believe there is a politician who is capable of getting this through. The public will not allow that.
What needs to be got through? What is it?
Yeah.
Just specific. What is it that needs to be got through?
We need to have an insurance-based system like they have in Australia and most of Europe, where people who can afford it are insured through their work. You have exemptions for certain people, limited exemptions, maybe for the under 60s, the over 70s, rather than the broader exemptions we have in the UK for prescriptions. Limited exemptions help from charities for people who really can't afford it, but basically a fee-based system where you have to pay, as you do in Ireland, you have to pay to see a GP and you have to pay to go to accident and emergency because the demand has spun out of control. You were talking earlier about the breakdown of the nuclear family. This is another issue, breakdown of society, so people can't get advice from, helpful grandmothers who know that not every feverish child needs to go to hospital. So all of these things have come to a perfect storm and caused this complete breakdown in the system.
But the big argument against it, and the thing that would make it so unpalatable to a lot of people, and the reason why I suspect politicians don't have the bottle to say this, is because as long as people would be able to point out the poorest or most impoverished or the most vulnerable in society and say that the thing that you have just proposed here would make them less well off in terms of healthcare, they would get worse healthcare, then it wouldn't be done. So would those people in society have worse healthcare as a result of what you've suggested?
My answer, I've got two answers to you, Patrick. Firstly, that has always been the argument against it, but right now, those same people, are not getting any healthcare anyway. So that argument breaks down because the most deprived people in society cannot access healthcare. And so whether they're worse off under a fee-based system doesn't matter because they're not worse off, they're as bad as they are now. The second point is, I believe it's up to the medical profession to take control of this. I engage with a lot of doctors on social media who always criticize me for saying a fee-based system. But they all think it's very unfair. And yet, GBNews put out a tweet a few hours ago that a lot of doctors are emigrating to Australia. And one of your colleagues quite rightly pointed out, hang on, the same people that won't accept a fee-based system here are emigrating to an insurance fee-based system in Australia. So they don't have a moral objection to it at all. They just don't want to see the UK adopt that system, a system that would work. It would raise money for the NHS. It would decrease demand to a level that everyone could get the access, including the poorest in society, because we could help them get the access. And if this isn't done soon, we're going to have winter after winter. This is just going to go on for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Lawrence Gurley said, thank you very, very much. GP at Same Day Doctor, just filling you in on exactly why we are seeing things like 15-hour waits at A&E now, people unable to get an ambulance, and crucially, what needs to be done about it. However unpalatable it will be for a politician, he is saying that he thinks we need an insurance-based system. And he makes the point, and I suspect depressingly we are in this situation right now, which is if your quality of healthcare is already so appallingly bad, do you mind changing the system, even if it means that some people who are at the lower end of, let's say, the economic spectrum or the societal spectrum whatsoever, just continue to get poor healthcare? It's already bad, isn't it? I don't know. That's a very controversial view. What do you make of it? GBViews at gbnews.uk. But on that, actually, loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on NHS waiting times. Who is to blame for 15-hour queues? Tony. This is Tony, who's a radiographer, actually. He says, in my opinion, it's partly down to most people not knowing who to consult. Is it a pharmacist, a GP, full A&E services? The difficulty accessing GP services is creating a dependency on hospital A&E services. And in many cases, the A&E doctor is doing the job of referring them to a specialist, which a GP could do. Yes, I mean, obviously, I defer to your greater knowledge than me. You appear to work in the NHS, Tony, and it's fantastic insight, that. And it's something, I think, that we've always suspected is happening, isn't it? Also, as well, people probably presenting themselves at A&E when they just don't really need to, full stop. I can't help but wonder if that is an issue. But again, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you don't want to deter people from going and scare them off going when actually they do need to go. That's the knock-on effect, isn't it? But look, thank you very much. Loads of you have been getting in touch, not just on that, but on the main issue of the day as well, which is that taxpayers' money has apparently been going to the Prevent scheme. The Prevent scheme in itself, allegedly, has been just dishing that money out to people who actually support things like, oh, I don't know, the Taliban and radical Islamist clerics, etc. So it doesn't appear as though, for want of a better phrase, the taxpayers getting a lot of bang for their buck. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, as Russia lashes out again with missile strikes on Ukraine, could the war end up removing Vladimir Putin from power? Exclusive insight after this short break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. Right, now, Russia has launched one of the largest missile bombardments on Ukraine cities since the war began, with at least 3 people being taken to hospital. That's as it's been revealed that Russian leader Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals if Ukraine continues to make gains in its successful counter-offensive. Speaking exclusively to GB News, former head of the British Army, General Lord Richard Dannett, says strategic losses and rapidly falling morale could open the real possibility of Putin's enforced removal. The old men in grey suits stuff, isn't it? But Lord Danner told our Home and Security Editor Mark White it was vital the US, the UK and other allies continue to stay the course in supplying Ukraine with state-of-the-art Western weapons systems.
For the better part of a year, Ukraine has been under relentless Russian bombardment. From missile strikes to tank and artillery fire, as Russian forces push to consolidate their gains. But in recent months, against seemingly insurmountable odds, the Ukrainians have been pushing back. A counter-offensive making key gains. Chief among them, recapturing the strategically important southern city of Kherson. The former head of the British Army believes if Ukraine can keep up that momentum in the months ahead, then the Russian president could find it increasingly difficult to cling on to power.
I could see a set of circumstances where the Russian military's morale would collapse. When you've lost the will to win, when you've decided that you're defeated in your own head, then you will lose. And of course, if that was to happen, that's a game changer. I think we would see a change of regime in the Kremlin. I think we would see Putin out.
There's no doubting the bravery and resolve of the Ukrainians, but it's sophisticated Western-supplied weapon systems that's helped give them the edge in many of their encounters with Russian forces. Lord Danner says it's absolutely vital that the US in particular stands firm in its support of Ukraine.
Yes, it's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
Also key is the continuation of the training of Ukrainian volunteers, particularly by Britain and Poland.
Yeah, so I'm going to place the TMH at the front. I'm going to ensure that the pins, are pulled out as we previously did, yeah?
Around 10,000 Ukrainians are being trained in the UK before returning home to take up the fight. In the months ahead, Ukraine has to keep up the momentum and continue making gains in its counter-offensive. Its stated aim to push Russia out of all Ukrainian territory. Defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford believes recapturing Crimea would guarantee their victory.
He or she who controls the Crimea or holds the Crimea basically controls the Black Sea and the entrance to the Sea of Azov. If the Ukrainians manage to take Crimea, that might be the point at which they are prepared to negotiate for peace.
In recent months, Russia has stepped up its strikes on key civilian infrastructure, heaping even more misery on Ukraine's population. Sadly, it is a grim pattern. The more military success Ukraine enjoys on the battlefield, the more its beleaguered towns and cities will suffer the effects of increased Russian bombardment. Mark White, GB News.
Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, with that fantastic piece for you on the latest when it comes to Ukraine. And to lend us his expertise on this topic is Defence Editor at the Evening Standard. It's Robert Fox. Great stuff, Robert. Fantastic to have you in the studio. So, do you think that Vladimir Putin is going to get essentially taken out or removed by his generals?
In the short term, it's very, very unlikely because he has built his power on protecting his power. Layer after layer after layer, his old mates from the KGB, the SFB, FSB, and they're all around him. It would really take a big effort, and particularly he's been buying in hard men like Sorokin and so on to back him. his political buddies like Lavrov and the defense minister, they don't really count for that much. They don't know what to do for the after Putin. It's not clear. And a junta of generals, I don't think would do any much better, and I think they'd do a lot worse. And I think that's a general feeling.
A couple of important questions. I am noticing a big shift in a lot of people, whether it's on social media, whether it's in our inbox here, or just people I talk to generally, really, who are saying, we're all right giving a bit of money and weapons to Ukraine. When will this stop? Because this is a lot of money and the British taxpayer is not really getting a vote on this.
Yeah, this is part of the problem. It's a crisis, which is a regional war of global implications. And when I say global implications, we're that part of the region because we know that our supply chain for food, for energy particularly, but above all, communications, these trillions of dollars worth of transactions that go through fiber optic cables. We know the Russians have been having a good look at it, may have been doing a bit of this, a bit of that, all around the British Isles, including Ireland. Amazingly, the Irish Navy really alerted us to some of the worst surveillance operations by the Russians. You know, they may be niggling, taking out a bank. You know, you get your banking online saying, oh, we're out of action for 3 hours. That's probably this kind of thing going on. So as long as Putin's around and in this cast of mind, he's going to be a darn nuisance for a long time, and that has to be taken, and we have got an interest in it. We've got to spend money on real defence. The argument that says, shouldn't we be spending money on food banks or whatever, well, you might as well close down the whole of defence, including the nuclear deterrent,
I get that,
build a block of
but people are
flats
concerned that there isn't a proper audit of exactly where this money's going, that we're just splashing the cash
Sorry,
abroad.
this is the second part of what I should have been saying to you. I'm being a bit long-winded about this. Is that this seems to be a long war or a war of indefinite time. But I was thinking, coming in knowing I was going to talk to you about this, the 120 missiles today, the fighting in the Donbass, particularly around south of Zaporizhia, that area, what's been going on in Belarus, trying to do joint training, saying we're doing nuclear drills. There's a bit of an air of desperation about this. So I would hazard, and shoot me down anybody if you absolutely know better, they're trying to close this off.
Yeah.
Russia, it looks to me, is going for a great big swipe by the end of March or mid-April at most. Putin really has to show progress that he is going to be Putin victorious by the 24th of February this coming year, the anniversary of this. So I'm absolutely with Lord Richard Dannett on this. You've got to stick with this at the moment. But the odd thing to say is the Americans have got to stop being so timid.
Right.
They're driving old-fashioned car. You can work out that I drive a manual, not an automatic. 1 foot on the accelerator, 1 foot on the foot brake all the time. Oh, we'll give you this. Oh, we'll give you a bit of Patriot. But you mustn't have anything that looks as if it could attack across Russian borders. You need weapons of that capability, not to do it, but you have to have it of that order in order to guarantee some sort of success to Ukraine. They've got to do something above all for the Ukrainian Air Force.
Thank you, Robert. And sorry about this. I appears to be having a coughing fit, but there we go. That's Defence Editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Right, OK, we are going to lob to a very short break now. Well, hopefully I can clear my throat. We've got loads more coming your way. Stay tuned.
Hello there, I'm Claire Nazir with your weather update. An amber warning for heavy rain has been issued across the southern parts of Scotland, a broad yellow warning for rain, Northern Ireland, central and southern areas of Scotland, and a warning for snow and ice across northern Scotland. Yes, the weather remains unsettled and cold in places, particularly in the north. One area of low pressure clearing towards the far north, another one approaching from the west. And this is an area of heavy rain, which will track across Northern Ireland, clipping northern England and pushing towards Scotland. At the same time, rain will approach Wales as well as the West Country as the winds pick up some strength. And the winds will be a feature of the weather through the first part of Friday. Severe gales across the North Channel, Gales across Irish Sea coast as well as Channel coast, and a wet and windy start to the day. So that amber warning reflects the fact that there's going to be issues on the roads with surface water, high rainfall totals. We could actually see some flooding here, so a risk of some really quite torrential rain for a time, but it clears quite quickly. By lunchtime, most places seeing some drier skies away from Shetland as well as Orkney, although a legacy of showers will arrive across Northern Ireland and Scotland through the afternoon. A blustery breeze here, a few showers running in across the southeast of England. Now overnight, some clearer skies yet again across more southern areas. Still icy across the far north of Scotland with the risk of snow above around 200 metres. And then some sporadic bursts of rain come in from the west across many parts as we head into the early hours of New Year's Eve. So still unsettled for the last day of 2022. Rain comes and goes through the day on New Year's Eve. Still a keen breeze coming in from the southwest. Even so, Scotland and Northern Ireland will remain cold. And through the day, the rain will intensify across more southern areas. A blustery day wherever you are, with showers to follow across more western areas, but even a little sunshine to end 2022 for Northern Ireland. Temperatures then will struggle in the north, milder in the south. And here's your outlook into the beginning of 2023. Dry skies on Monday with even some sunshine.
Welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, why are taxpayers like you and I funding people who support the Taliban, banned Islamist groups and radical Muslim hate preachers? That is according to a leaked version of the Prevent report. Dr. Rakiba Sam will join me on that shocking story next. Serious question marks, and this really is serious, as to whether or not it's being done deliberately. Some of these groups even wanted Muslim members of our armed forces not to follow orders. The Labour Party want to let victims of crime decide the perpetrator's punishment. They say they're now the party of law and order. You can choose what unpaid work the bloke who graffitied your car shop window wants to do. After the new General Secretary of the TUC warned of coordinated strikes in the new year, is it wrong for these union barons to be holding the country to ransom? And finally, a new report said the BBC, a.k.a. the British Batching Corporation, is, quote, rewriting British history to promote a woke agenda. Get your views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Does the BBC have a lefty woke bias? Should we stop paying money to terrorist sympathisers? gbviews at gbnews.uk. But before that, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. It's 5 o'clock. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Defence Secretary says the UK's response to China opening up travel abroad is under review. Ben Wallace's comments follow the government saying there were no plans to introduce mandatory COVID-19 tests for arrivals from China, unlike several other countries, including the US and Italy. Beijing has announced plans to reopen borders next week, despite the country's ongoing COVID surge that sparked concern. Mr. Wallace says he expects to get some clarification soon.
Well, I think the government has said it's now going to keep that under review and review whether different countries with COVID outbreaks, etc., should obviously face different restrictions. I think as we speak, that is being reviewed, and I'll expect to see some clarification, I think, by the Department of Transport probably today or tomorrow.
The Defence Secretary also insisted UK borders are safe as the military steps in to cover for striking Border Force officials. Unions claim the country's borders are less secure as more than 1,000 immigration officers walk out in a dispute over pay. A senior source has told GB News that passport control operations are running very smoothly at all 6 airports. A third man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of 23-year-old Cody Fisher in Birmingham. The non-league footballer was stabbed to death on Boxing Day in the Crane nightclub, which now faces being shut down. West Midlands police have said a 22-year-old man has been detained in London. 4 others have been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Police say a third arrest has been made in connection with the fatal shooting of a 26-year-old woman in Wirral. Elle Edwards was killed outside a pub on Christmas Eve. Merseyside police have said a 31-year-old man from Tranmere has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. A man and a woman who were previously arrested are still being questioned by officers. Belarus has called for Ukraine to investigate after one of its air defence missiles was fired over its territory. Belarus's defence says it's brought down a Ukrainian S-300 missile, summoning Ukraine's ambassador to investigate to prevent it happening again. It comes on the day of one of the largest Russian strikes since the start of the war. Ukraine says it's shot down 54 of the 69 Russian missiles fired in the country, which has reportedly left 90% of the western city of Lviv without power. Vladimir Putin could be unseated by his own generals if Ukraine continues to make gains in its counter-offensive. That's according to the former head of the British Army. Speaking to GB News, General Lord Richard Dannatt said strategic losses and rapidly falling morale could see the Russian leaders in forced removal. But Lord Dannatt insists it's vital the UK, US and other allies continue to supply Ukraine with Western weapons.
Yes, it's important that the European countries do. One or two are looking a bit wobbly. Important that European countries stay behind, but really important that Uncle Sam stays behind Ukraine. That's absolutely critical because the sophisticated weaponry that's going in is the game changer.
The Vatican says former Pope Benedict is in a serious but stable condition after concerns were raised over his health. In a statement, it said the 95-year-old is lucid and had rested well overnight. Yesterday, Pope Francis called for prayers for his predecessor, warning he was very sick. The former head of the Catholic Church became the first pope to stand down in 600 years in 2013. At least 19 people have been killed and up to 30 are missing following a huge fire at a hotel casino in Cambodia. That's according to local media. The blaze started around midnight last night at the Grand Diamond City Casino on the border with Thailand. Police say around 400 people were in the building when it caught fire. Authorities are still investigating. The deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 69 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will see spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. Forecasters have issued an amber weather alert for heavy rain tomorrow for parts of Scotland, warning of flooding and travel disruption. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 5:05. As we've been discussing, a review into the government's Prevent programme has found that taxpayers' money has been handed to groups promoting Islamist extremism. The review, led by William Shawcross, found that individuals who've allegedly supported the Taliban, defended militant Islamist groups banned in the UK and hosted hate preachers are amongst those who've received taxpayers' money. To discuss this right now, I'm joined by social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Assad. Dr. Rakib, great to see you again. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Big question for me on this, and it's the question that's been raised in the press today, which is, did the people behind the Prevent scheme deliberately send taxpayers' money to people that they know support groups like the Taliban and indeed also wanted Muslim members of our armed forces to refuse orders?
Well, Patrick, I'll say one thing. It needs to be thoroughly investigated. But in truth, I'm not necessarily surprised, because under our state-backed model of multiculturalism, we have seen so-called community leaders empowered under that model in order to try and facilitate social stability in our local communities, when in reality, some of those leaders and figures have been responsible for peddling divisive extremist narratives. So I think the one thing for certain is that if these reports are indeed true, then what we're seeing here is a fundamental failure of Prevent, where groups are being funded to ultimately cultivate social cohesion and solidarity in their local communities, but in reality are peddling extremist narratives which are posing a fundamental threat to social cohesion in our country.
And is that just overtly because there are groups in this country right now who say that they are very well-meaning Islamic groups who actually want to create an Islamic state in this country and are willing to lie to people like Prevent in order to do that?
Well, Patrick, I've come across examples of charitable organisations. They speak the language of harmony and peace, But in reality, when you're looking at some of those charities, what they actually promote and the kind of organisations, other organisations that they support, secretly what they want is various forms of Islamist regulation in the British social sphere. In some cases, they've even expressed support for regimes which are very much hostile towards the British state and more broadly the Western world. So I think that what this really calls for is a fundamental exploration of how that funding is being allocated and the kind of organisations that are receiving those sources of funding.
It says here the Home Office officials are terrified of looking like they are picking on Muslims. What are they afraid of?
Well, I've no idea what they're afraid of, Patrick, because a lot of those organisations aren't representative of British Muslims at all. And this is a point that I made in our conversation yesterday, that if people want to take that line of thinking, what they're doing is actually betraying anti-Islamist British Muslims who are just as concerned as the wider public when it comes to extremism in their own communities.
No, exactly, and this is the thing, and I am concerned that this is totally self-defeating on numerous different fronts. Firstly, the fact that actual taxpayers' money might actually have gone to groups who are just using it to promote things like radical Islam. I mean, that's self-defeating, of course it is, certainly from something called Prevent. But also the fact that if you think that you're doing this to not seem like you're picking on areas of the Muslim community, you're bracketing all the Muslim community in under one particular umbrella, which is hugely unfair. And on top of that as well, I think it's self-defeating because if it looks like a cover-up, it'll probably lead to more far-right issues because people feel as though their security forces aren't protecting them. Surely the best thing to do is just get this all out in the open.
Well, one of the most ridiculous accusations of Prevent is that it alienates British Muslims en masse. But there was a study by Crest Advisory a couple of years ago, which showed that 56% of British Muslims surveyed had not even heard of Prevent, Patrick. So I'm not sure how you can be alienated by a programme that you're not even aware of. And so I think that what we're seeing here, we're seeing the peddling of narratives which are simply not rooted in reality. And what we really need to do is empower anti-Islamist British Muslims who are very concerned about extremism in their local communities, instead of possibly funding groups which do not have social cohesion at heart.
We've heard that this report might be focusing quite significantly, or Prevent, sorry, might be focusing quite significantly on far-right terrorism, more so than Islamist terrorism. I understand that far-right terrorism or far-right ideology is increasing in the United Kingdom, but I do also understand there have been 35 times more deaths from radical Islamist terrorism since 2005 in the UK than there have from far-right terrorism. Why is there apparently such a focus when it comes to the far-right? Is it because maybe it's easier to target, there's less backlash?
Well, Patrick, I certainly wouldn't be in the business of trivialising the far-right terror threat. Being a British Muslim myself who's done a considerable amount of research on far-right anti-Semitism, and also living all my life in Luton, which was the home of the English Defence League, was formed here. But I think what we are seeing is that some people are very concerned about taking a robust approach against Islamist extremism because they're fearful that this is stigmatizing a religious minority. So I think that what we really need to do is look at how Prevent activities are being orchestrated, and are they reflective of the ideological composition of the broader terror threat in this country, with the prevailing terror threat being Islamist extremism. Hard right extremism represents the fastest growing threat, but in terms of relative size, it is dwarfed by the broader threat of Islamist extremism, and we shouldn't lose sight of that.
No, exactly. I'm just going to read a couple of things out from today's reports about this. So the report cites 4 examples, this is of where money went to from the Prevent scheme, including the leader of a Prevent-funded civil society organisation which made public statements favourable and supportive of the Taliban. They had referred to militant Islamist groups prescribed by the UK as legitimate resistance groups, and said that Muslim members of the armed forces should refuse orders. Is there an element in our society of certain Muslim groups who really do just want to infiltrate any single area of our society, almost like sleeper cells?
I think that this is something that I've written about in the past, Patrick. I think what you have sections, extremist sections of British Muslim communities. Ultimately, what they want Islamist-inspired control of the social sphere. And if truth be told, they certainly don't want British Muslims participating in the armed forces or law enforcement agencies more generally. So this is ultimately a matter of control and influence. What we don't need is state resources potentially being allocated to groups who think in such a warped way of Britain and also hold extremist ideologies that pose a fundamental threat to social stability in our country.
Dr. Rakib, thank you very much as ever, my good man. Great to have you on the show. Dr. Rakib Hassan, their social policy analyst, just reacting to the shocking headlines that are coming out today. We hit on it a bit yesterday, but actually it's moved on because more and more detail is coming out about the idea anyway, and the big question mark that whether or not money, taxpayers' money, was deliberately given to groups known to support radical Islamism. Why could that be? The question is, of course, is it deliberate? Is there some agenda there? Can anyone actually be this incompetent? GBViews at GBnews.uk, and it's to that inbox that I'm going right now because many of you have been sending in your thoughts on this. Mick says, as with most of the UK's problems, the revelation that taxpayers' money has been given to terrorist-supporting groups is down to liberal left-wingers. The bleeding heart liberals are more concerned with terrorist perpetrators than victims and the safety of the majority. My big concern with this, Mick, would be about the fact that it appears to be some kind of cover-up. The only reason we're reporting on this or able to report on it is because people have actually leaked this report. They wanted it redacted. It's been sitting on a shelf for a couple of years and we're none the wiser about it. And now people have gone, enough's enough. We want it out there. This was not volunteered to us. This was not given up to us willingly. And I can't help but feel as though that response here of Home Office officials are terrified of looking like they are picking on Muslims, that is not their decision to make. The British public has a right to know whether or not you, me, every single person that we know has been giving some of our hard-earned cash to groups that may be very well-meaning on paper, may say that they want to bring community cohesion, to clamp down on things like extremism. In fact, they're literally saying they want to clamp down on extremism. The whole time, they're welcoming hate clerics into mosques and saying that Muslim people should not fight in our armed forces and saying that actually they support the Taliban. We have a right to know whether or not these groups exist, even if it is a very inconvenient truth for some people on the left in society. We should be able to find that out. Just one more. Jacqueline says, I used to work for local government and attend mandatory prevent training. It seemed back to front. When I questioned this afterwards, I was told that it was not to prevent radicalisation and terrorism, but to prevent hatred towards Muslims and Islam. Well, there you go. Strong views on a lot of different sides to this particular issue. GBViews at gbnews.uk is that email address. Thank you very much for everyone who's been getting in touch throughout the course of this show on that issue. It's an issue that I'm certainly not going to let drop here because I think the security and the safety of our citizens should be paramount, more so than the security and the safety of protecting the names, the bad names, of some of the groups who apparently seek to wish to do us a lot of harm. I think our priorities are all a little bit skewed. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, Shadow Women and Equality Secretary Annalise Dodds has blamed racial disparities in the ability to pay energy bills on structural racism. Tory backbencher of the year. That's right, people. We've got an award winner on this show. It's about time. Lee Anderson might have a thing or two to say about that. He joins me right after this break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back, wonderful people. Now, the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities has blamed structural racism for the racial discrepancies in the ability to pay energy bills. Reacting to ONS figures which show that a higher than average percentage of black adults struggle to pay their energy bills, Annalise Dodds said this: "The mental and physical toll put on people unable to heat their homes or keep a roof over their heads is staggering, and is particularly intense for black families. Labour has a long-term plan to tackle the structural racism that scars our society and leaves black, Asian and minority ethnic people worse off through our Race Equality Act." But Tory MP Lee Anderson responded to Annalise Dodds by saying, I won't do the voice, "Now then, it would appear energy bills are racist. British Gas never asked me what colour my skin was when I signed up. This is what Labour stand for. I cannot abide divisive politics. Call this nonsense out." Well, joining me now to keep on calling out this quotes-unquote nonsense is Westminster's most straight-talking MP. It's Lee Anderson. Now, Lee, I should just mention before we start that you have recently won an award, actually, and it is about time that we had an award winner on this show. I think everyone can agree with that. You were recently voted Backbench Tory MP of the Year by Conservative Home Readers, and I would just like to say congratulations. Well done, Lee Anderson, Tory MP, Backbencher of the Year. Right, talk to me about this. What nonsense is Annalise Dodds talking?
Well, I think, Patrick, and happy Christmas and ho, ho, ho and all that sort of stuff that goes on. I think she's probably had a little bit too much Christmas sherry over the holiday period. Look, this is absolute nonsense, and I think if I was a black man waking up this morning reading these sort of headlines, I'd be pretty upset with the Labour Party. I mean, how dare they? How dare they blame structural racism on a person's ability to be able to budget or pay their utility bills? Again, it's more divisive nonsense. And as she quotes the ONS figures about disparity between blacks and Asian families and white people, I mean, that's a lot of nonsense as well. We know for a fact that Chinese and Indian families earn, proportionally more money than white British people. And she never harps on about, the discrepancies or white working class boys, are they left behind and you're more chance of being going to Oxbridge if you're a black boy than a white working class boy. So this needs put into one side and calling out. There are problems in this country. We're aware of that, but to talk about energy bills and blame it on somebody's skin colour is shocking. It's what Labour's sunk to. It's a new low, but I'm not surprised.
They do seem very keen to prioritise everything in terms of race. For example, the Labour Party analysis showed that black households are also 4 times more likely to be behind on rent or mortgage payments than white adults, apparently. And more than 2/3 of black adults are finding it difficult to afford their energy bills, compared with 45% of all adults. This is, supposedly anyway, analysis done by the Labour Party. Do you think that some people might be quite keen for the Labour Party to pipe up on race when it comes to things like working-class white boys underperforming at school?
Well, they never talk about that subject, Patrick. They always play the race card. If you're going to play the race card, be fair across the board. Talk about every single demographic, every single different race, but they won't do that. They've got this a bee in the bonnet, the Labour Party have. They always have about, putting everything back to race, blaming it on race. They always try to find a group of people in society and try and turn them into victims and then convince them that they're victims and we're all nasty, cruel Tories and we're all being horrible people. Look, this is still a wonderful country we live in. I always say that. If people have got problems with the bills, regardless of what race, then we need to get to the root cause, not just saying it's because of a different skin colour and using that. It's pretty poor from Labour. But if I'm going to be honest, they need, if they keep saying this sort of stuff, then that increases my majority in the next election.
Is it not actually a bit of a concern that the opposition thinks that there is structural racism in absolutely every single area of British life? It implies that they look around at all they survey and they think it's all racist and all of it needs ripping up root and branch. That's quite a bleak picture of Britain, isn't it?
It is, and one could argue, Patrick, that structural racism is rife in the Labour Party. I mean, when was the last time the Labour and sexism? When was the last time the Labour Party had a female leader or an Asian leader? Never had that. So they bang on about structural racism. It's they need to look at their own party first. I mean, look, you've got a picture of Sakir there, the front bench. There's not much racial diversity there. They need to stop talking about it. I always say this, Patrick. 99% of the population. And the doors I knock on, this never comes up. This is nonsense. This is rubbish. People are concerned about the fuel bills, etc. Of course they are. But this using the racism card is pathetic. It's poor.
Well, just on that note, and moving this on very slightly to another key issue that the Labour Party are very keen to put forward, which is that they are now the party of law and order. For a while, I thought they were just the party of taking the knee, Lee.
Well, look, Patrick, it's interesting. Now, I sat through all the stages of the police and crime bill earlier on this year and the year before, where we were increasing sentences for rapists and murders and child molesters, where we're doing all sorts of good stuff, getting it into legislation. And yet the Labour Party voted against every single stage of that bill. And also, I remember a debate I was in earlier. I think it was earlier this year, where the Labour MPs were complaining that we were deporting foreign criminals. I mean, they actually stood up and says, it was last year actually, I think it was Diane Abbott that stood up in Parliament and said it was cruel to deport foreign criminals so near to Christmas. They were taken away from the family. This is the real Labour Party, Patrick. And I think the people see through this. And no, they're not serious about it. What they're doing is they're on another bandwagon. There's an election in 18 months to 2 years' time. It's another bandwagon they can join on. But actually, when it comes to the crunch, I don't think the British people will trust them on law and order.
The Labour Party do point to the fact that conviction rates, or charge rates, I should say, have gone down to around 5.4%, which we can all agree is catastrophically low. Yeah. I just wonder whether or not the Labour Party are going to get themselves onto a little bit of a sticky wicket, Lee, when it comes to actually being in power, because one way to maybe cut down on things like violent crime would be to, increase stop and search. And they seem to be dead against stuff like that, don't they? Because stop and search in itself as well, apparently, is racist.
Yeah, this is more hypocrisy, Patrick. You're quite right. Stop and search. We know it works, and they say it's racist. They'll say things like, you're more likely to be stopped if you're a black young man in parts of London. Or look, if there are parts of London where predominantly there are a lot of black men, then the chances are black men will get stopped and searched. And look, and if it saves people's lives, if it deters people from carrying from knives and attacking people, there's got to be a good thing. And quite honestly, I'm not bothered what colour a person's skin is. If somebody's got a knife in their pocket, it needs taken away and they need locking up. That's the real crux of the matter, Patrick. Labour's, like you say, their own backbenchers won't be very happy with this sort of language, I'm pretty sure, because they always seem to be interested in not the victims' feelings, but the actual perpetrators of some of these horrible crimes. They're scared to hurt their feelings sometimes. So, like I say, I think the British public see through this nonsense.
I have got to ask you though, Lee. I mean, the case for Labour being given a go, right, at running this country is becoming increasingly loud when it looks like the Conservative Party aren't getting to grips with, well, various things one would expect a Conservative Party to get to grips with, to be honest with you, like immigration, like illegal immigration, like housing, the party of home ownership, and like things like we're just seeing now with law and order. I mean, is it frustrating for you to see your party, frankly, deviating from its core message, and then you end up with the Labour Party allowing themselves to stand up and say they're now going to be the party of law and order? We've got the solutions for the channel,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Patrick. We have let ourselves down a little bit, I think, especially on the immigration. And we're trying to get to grips with it. I'm pretty confident that Suella will get to grips with it, but we've said that before. We've been marched to the top of the hill many times on this subject. Look, and Labour are ahead in the polls. That's no secret, but it's not because of anything they've actually done or any of their policies. It's more to do with us failing on certain key promises. But we've got 2 years to turn it round. Like I say, Rishi's come out swinging, and like I say, I think Suella's superb at the moment. She's saying all the right things. If we can get that right, get that trust back with the British public, and I'm pretty sure, because when I speak to voters in Ashfield, they're a little bit grumpy with the Conservative Party, especially the first-time Tory voters. But they're not telling me that they're going back to Labour. They just feel a little bit let down at the moment, but I'm sure we can win them back.
Lee, I won't keep you much longer, but I just wanted to finish with something that I think is quite important, OK? So every single year, Conservative Home do a sweepstake on Conservative backbenchers to try to find the most popular. And the winner, with 54 votes, is yourself. You have beaten Boris Johnson, who got 35 votes. Jacob Rees-Mogg got 32. Remarkably, Theresa May bracketed in the same bracket as John Redwood, 29 each. Graham Brady, 22 votes. But you are the winner of the Conservative Home's Tory backbencher of the year. This comes despite the fact that you have got into numerous scraps with the likes of Steve Bragg. You've called out Gary Neville. You said what I think a lot of people were thinking about, educating people about how to eat on the cheap in a cost of living crisis. You copped a lot of stick for that, but Lee, the public seem to love you. Why?
Oh, you know what, Patrick? Last year I was voted the worst man in Britain by the Daily Mirror. Now, I don't know who actually voted in that poll. I think it was just the people that worked in the Daily Mirror office. But the real one, the real award that counts is the Con Home one. That for me is the Oscar of politics. I'm chuffed a bit, and my family is so proud. And you know what? I just try and say what normal people out on the street in Ashfield are thinking.
All right, well, there you go. You get another one of these on the way out. Hey, fantastic. That is Lee Anderson there, the Conservative Home Backbench MP of the Year. Good stuff. OK, all right. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Labour's claims of so-called racist energy bills. Daniel says, if anything, the energy companies are racist towards us hard-working Brits. Black or white, and not towards these immigrants who get everything paid for them. I mean, that's interesting. I don't think that's really the energy company's fault, is it, to be fair? But I do take your point there. I think it is a little bit annoying, more than a little bit annoying. In fact, I find it incredibly infuriating, actually, that where I live right now, for example, this will be the same, by the way, for millions of people up and down the country. Where I live right now, you see energy bills going up and you see whatever going up. And then if you walk within a couple of miles of where you live, there's every chance that you will find a hotel full of people packed to the rafters who've made their way across the channel, and everything there appears to be paid for them completely in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I find that quite hard to believe. And then you do also look at all of the money that appears to be going to Ukraine. Fine, all right, I get that there are a lot of reasons why some money needs to go to Ukraine, but when we're being told that we're skint here ourselves, and then you look at a load of taxpayers' money being sent to people who support the Taliban, i.e. in our Prevent scheme, I find that absolutely shocking. Yes, I can agree with you that maybe you think that actually the way that we are spending our money in this country is not exactly top drawer. James says, I'll paraphrase what James is saying here now, what the heck are Labour talking about? I'm sick and tired of all this racist nonsense. And James, I can't help but feel as though we're just being pigeonholed relentlessly. If there is now, according to the Labour Party, structural racism in our energy bills. I mean, how can that be the case? You've got a meter in your house, right? Or whatever format they use, a smart meter. That just says how much energy you're using. And that's that. What do they want? Anyway, John says, time for one more quick one. No question, Lee Anderson for PM. His come and speak to my constituents in Ashfield would wipe the floor with Posh Starmer and the rest of the Islington set. A real man, some people think there. Anyway, you're with me, Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, the new General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress has warned that unions could coordinate strikes on the same day next year. Would it be wrong for them to do this, i.e. a general strike? I will be joined by Labour MP Khalid Mahmood and former Tory MP Neil Parish to debate this question. But first, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. It's 5:33. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Defence Secretary says the UK's response to China opening up travel abroad is under review. Ben Wallace's comments follow the government saying there were no plans to introduce mandatory COVID-19 tests for arrivals from China, unlike several other countries, including the US and Italy. Beijing has announced plans to reopen borders next week, despite the country's ongoing COVID surge that sparked concern. Mr. Wallace says he expects to get some clarification soon. Belarus has called for Ukraine to investigate after one of its air defence missiles was fired over its territory. Belarus's defence says it's brought down a Ukrainian S-300 missile, summoning Ukraine's ambassador to investigate to prevent it happening again. It comes on the day of one of the largest Russian strikes since the war began. Ukraine says it shot down 54 of the 69 Russian missiles fired in the country, which has reportedly left 90% of the western city of Lviv without power. A third man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of 23-year-old Cody Fisher. The non-league footballer was stabbed to death on Boxing Day in a Birmingham nightclub, which now faces being shut down. West Midlands Police says a 22-year-old man has been detained in London. 4 others have been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Police say a third arrest has been made in connection with the fatal shooting of Elle Edwards. She was killed outside a pub in Wirral on Christmas Eve. Merseyside Police says a 31-year-old man from Tranmere has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Another man and a woman are still being questioned by officers. Now, the deadly storm that's been sweeping across North America, killing at least 69 people, is now bringing wet and windy weather to the UK. The Met Office says the knock-on effect of America's bomb cyclone will see spells of unsettled weather over the next 7 to 10 days. Forecasters have issued an amber weather alert for heavy rain on tomorrow for parts of Scotland, warning of flooding and travel disruption. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel. Hey, right now, this show will be nothing without you wonderful people, whether you're watching at home or listening on your radio or online, whatever, and you've all been getting in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, specifically on NHS waiting times. You remember I was talking to Dr Lawrence Gurlis last hour? Well, Jackie's been on. The NHS has only one malaise: waste. Senior managers and senior doctors must take responsibility for the shocking waste in our health service. Jackie, any time that you hear anyone on the street now say, I am pro-nurse, I'm pro-nurses strike, I am pro-ambulance drivers strike, and specifically if you do see a nurse or an ambulance driver is saying it, just say, OK, fine then, how do you feel about the fact that there is a director of lived experience or a diversity manager on 4 times your salary? And they won't be able to answer it because they don't like to eat their own. That's true. They don't like to criticise other members of the NHS staff. They don't like to criticise other members of the NHS workforce. They'll go, oh, well, you know, everyone does a job. Yeah, but is their job 3 or 4 times more important than you, the person who saves lives? No, it isn't. That exposes their hypocrisy there, really. It will just want a bit more money. Anyway, Jim says, I totally disagree with the doctor who was on your show regarding pay-as-you-go system for the NHS. The real reasons the NHS is in such a terrible state are because it has been badly managed by the politicians over the years. Too much, yeah, I mean, look, of course it's been badly managed by politicians, absolutely. Too much money is being wasted on management, yeah, there you go. And most importantly, the pharmaceutical companies robbing the NHS blind with their pricing of extortionate medicines. Can I just say, I'm waiting for the real deep dive on this, the actual price that pharmaceutical companies are charging us, because if we are pumping in something like 199 billion quid a year into our NHS, and that is not enough money to pay staff as much money as we could do, not as much as they'd like, but as much money as we could do. There's not enough money to secure actual decent quality of services in every single case or facilities. Where is all of that money going? Why is it being spent so poorly? And a lot of it is because it's absolutely extortionate what the pharmaceutical companies are doing to us. But isn't it amazing how little Big Pharma is really in the news? Anyway, now, the TUC, everyone's favourite people, has warned of coordinated strikes among unions in the new year, i.e. a general strike. Speaking today, Paul Nowak suggested that unless more successful negotiations with the government took place, unions may start taking strike action together on the same day. But is it wrong for these union barons to be holding the country to ransom? To debate this now, I am joined by Labour MP Khalid Mahmood and former Conservative MP Neil Parish. Thank you very much, both of you. I'll start with you, Khalid. Would you support a general strike?
I would support the rights of the people to be able to strike. If they want to coordinate that, they're totally at will to do that. And if you don't call that a general strike, yes. Because the people who work want to have the right sort of pay and conditions, and they should be able to do that once they've gone through all the requirements of the Thatcher bills that went forward that, and they've done that, and they should be able to then strike.
So we do have a sitting Labour MP right here on the telly, Khalid Mahmood, saying you would support a general strike.
Yes.
Wow. OK. All right, fair enough. Conservative MP Neil Parish, your reaction?
Former Conservative MP Patrick. Yes, I very much would not support that because I feel that I'm old enough to live through the 70s and all the strikes and where it sort of basically brought down what was then a Labour government. And the more the government got involved with pay negotiations, in some ways, the worse it got. And so therefore, this idea of a national strike, if we are going to sort of deal with each individual, if the nurses need more pay, and I think people have got a lot of sympathy for that, can't afford the 19%, but perhaps we can afford more that's being offered at the moment. All of these things have got to be taken in their entirety, but not just a coordinated strike, because I think then it becomes very much, I think everybody believes it becomes very political. And I do believe now it's got to a stage, is it about the workers or is it just about trying to bring down a government? And I think, at this moment, public want to see public sector workers get some more pay, but they don't actually want these coordinated strikes. They don't want to be upset with their travel arrangements in the NHS. I mean, the postal workers actually striking over Christmas was absolutely crazy, if I dare say it, because that's the one time that the post office can actually make some real money, and it always struggles to make money. And of course, me being previously a rural MP, I'm farming now, just about to build an ark with all this rain that's going on. But seriously, what worries me about the postal service is the universal side of it, because naturally rural postal deliveries is much more expensive.
I'm just gonna bring Labour MP Khalid Mahmood in there. Khalid, I can't help but feel as though you are at odds with your own party leader on this, who doesn't appear to want any strike, let alone a general strike. Will you be what will you be doing? Will you be resigning the Labour whip and going on your own, getting down the picket lines?
No, that's not. That's the issue is with the front bench, and Keir Starmer was quite right to hold the front bench on this issue. But as a backbencher, as somebody who has gone through the National Health Service, who's worked with the people in the NHS, who's gone through a transplant myself, as I've said to you, I know the hard work that they do. What the government is going to do is start talking to them. That's all they want. And that's what they've said. If just before Christmas, if the Health Secretary of State spoke to them, we would be in this position. It's in the government's hand, and that's what Keir Starmer is saying. It's got to be in the government's hand, Patrick, and they're going to do that, and they're going to talk to them.
Just talking of Christmas, Khalid, are you at home at the minute? Do you mind me asking? Are you at home? Did you have a nice festive period? Did you with your family?
I'm abroad at the moment.
You're abroad? Oh, fair enough. All right, OK. Well, I'm just wondering, because you are obviously in secure employment at the minute, you get a nice salary. Actually, in fact, if you did get a train, the taxpayer could probably pay for that train journey from wherever you normally live over back to Parliament, and you probably have a nice little break away with your family. But a lot of people weren't able to see their family for strikes or get to their job as a freelancer, say, where they're not on a secure wage because of these strikes.
Patrick, you can't use people who are working and asking for their pay conditions against the people. This is the issue with the government.
No, I'm just wondering whether you're best placed to be supporting for this general strike, to be honest with you, from the position that you're in. Some would call it an ivory tower.
Well, it's not. We work as members of Parliament. That's what we have. The payment is what we have. Neil was on that before he resigned as a member of Parliament, and that's what's set. As far as we're concerned, as me as a Labour member of Parliament, I work virtually throughout the year. I'm still working now. I've been working throughout, looking at my emails, responding to them whilst I've been away. I carry on looking on my patch and see what's going on. But what we have to do is the government has to look at how we can support those people in the National Health Service, in the ambulance service, and all those people who work very hard throughout the period, and talk to them. What they want is the government to talk to them.
OK. Neil, the people who seem to be behind these strikes appear to be veering further and further to the left, and actually, genuinely as well, further left than the actual Labour Party at the minute. That is important to say, although I'm starting to wonder. So what do you think that we are actually just seeing people who are desperate to push some kind of radical socialist agenda doing all they can to do that, knowing that they don't have mainstream political support?
You see, I think what happens with every union, with any type of organisation, the higher you get up, in many cases, the more militant you become and the more militants take over. And I think many of the workers have got a very legitimate cause. But you see, there are independent pay reviews. They are settling, they should settle the dispute. And I will repeat what I said at the beginning of the interview. Bringing the government in sounds like a clever idea, but it won't, because all it'll do is escalate it. Because if you gave in to one particular section of workers, then they'd all want it. And then the ones that started off at the beginning would decide that they hadn't had quite enough, and so they'll go back for some more. And it's just history repeating itself. Now, everybody wants to get a decent wage, but it's got to be paid for. It's got to be paid for by private sector and other taxpayers as well, which are having an awful job making a living now with energy crisis. Getting to work, hospitality sector, all of that over Christmas has been badly, affected by all these strikes. We are all in it together, and I know the Labour Party would say that, but of course, don't forget we are in it with the public and private sector. If you're trying to run a business and make a living at the moment, very difficult, and I think people should be a little bit careful when they start coordinating strikes, because I think a lot of the start to believe that it was a politically motivated, and I don't think you want.
All right, Neil, I'm just going to give the final word to Khaled, who I can see is itching to get involved very quickly. Go on.
Yeah, just very quickly, what they need is, people do need that new rise in payment, what they're asking for. The government has to sit down to talk to them. The pay reviews are outdated. The last health service pay review was considered in February. The data was 6 months before that, before we had a huge hike in inflation and the interest rates and the fuel and food poverty. So you can't stick to that. So what you've got to do is the government's got to come forward and deal with it.
But bring that pay review forward, but not let the government directly get involved, because it won't work.
Then speak to somebody to do something about it.
Yeah, I get that someone needs to do something about it, but just everyone. Even driving examiners. Anyway, we've run out of time. We're going to have you both on. I have enjoyed this, and I appreciate the spirit in which it was all intended. Thank you very much, both of you. That was Labour MP Khalid Mahmood and former Conservative MP Neil Parish. That was a Labour MP live on air saying he supports the general strike. So make of that what you will. Anyway, the BBC is rewriting history to promote a woke agenda. That's according to a group of leading historians. The report from the History Reclaimed cites multiple examples of what they describe as bias in the national broadcaster's documentaries and accuses the corporation of failing to offer impartiality. To discuss this now, I'm joined by the co-editor of History Reclaimed and professor at Cambridge University. It's David Abulafia. David, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. I read with a lot of interest your report into the BBC's wokeism, trying to rewrite history. And in fact, it's led to one individual saying that he thinks that the BBC has put a fatwa on Winston Churchill. Is that too extreme?
Well, I think that is, yes. I know who said that, and I admire him greatly, but it's a sort of metaphor. But there is a real danger that the sort of hyperbole gets out of control. And what really worries me is that sort of sense that we're not getting into a debate at all. What we're looking at is very strong assertions by people who have particular views about the history, basically, of the last 500 years, which, in their view, is all dominated by the history of the horrific transatlantic slave trade. And they don't want to discuss with people like us what's really going on. And what we're saying is, look, come on, we need to have a proper discussion. And the BBC has got somehow sort of caught up in this. And what the BBC needs to be doing is it needs to be getting people of very differing views to sort of sit side by side and talk together about the way in which history should be presented.
Can I just give you an example? I know you're aware of it. It's more for our viewers and listeners. So programmes highlighted in this report include, get this, the misadventures of Ramesh Ranganathan. So they've sent a comedian, the BBC, to visit a place called Freetown in Sierra Leone. He discusses Britain's role in the slave trade without mentioning at all that the city is called Freetown because it was the destination of freed slaves, freed by the British, set up by the British. And one would appear to think this is a willful airbrushing of the good things about British history and a willful highlighting of the bad things. Does the BBC hate Britain?
I don't think the BBC hate Britain, but I think they've developed a notion of Britain which is so caught up with this sort of sense that Britain has to apologise for things that it did several hundred years ago, that even the great innovations of the Industrial Revolution, in which Britain was the great leader, at the end of the 18th century, that all of this was supposedly funded by the slave trade. It's simply not true. I mean, economic historians don't believe that, or very, very few of them did. It's an old argument that goes back to a book published in the 1940s. So they've just got caught up with this. It's a sort of way of thinking that's become very fashionable. And what we're saying is, look, you have to dig deeper. It's not as simple as that. One of the points about the study of the past, the study of anything really in modern society, is you have to have nuance. You have to have a sense of proportion. You have to listen to other arguments.
David, I'm very worried about this. I'm just interested because we're a little bit pressed for time, David. Sorry about this, but I'm concerned about the wider effect that this has, because a lot of people, especially the younger generation, will just watch these things, not clock that there is any kind of one-sidedness going on here, just take it as fact, and that could be really negative.
Yes, that is precisely the sort of thing that worries us. And, it gets into school curricula. These films are shown again and again in schools and so on. And this sort of idea, it becomes just the established view when, there's a very long tradition of serious historical research that has shown things in a different light. So what do you need to do about this? I'm not saying that you should shut off the arguments of people who have these, if you like, woke views about the past. I'm saying we have to put them in a position where they're forced to argue their case, because I think they will lose on the battlefield. They will actually lose. We can show so many things. It's not just what they've ignored. It's the way in which factual information is distorted. I mean, things like, the involvement of African kings in actually selling the slaves. It's a horrible story, but it's something that the whole of humanity has.
And it's unfashionable to tell, unfortunately, which is, I suspect, why they're not doing it, as you alluded to earlier. David, thank you very, very much. That is the co-editor of History of Reclaim and professor at Cambridge University, David Abulafia, there, just whizzing you through. Gosh, we've had it all today, ladies and gentlemen, from Prevent, from the NHS on its knees, to Labour now being the party of law and order, to a Labour MP calling for his support for a general strike. Good grief. Well, now, up next, we've got Jubes & Co. with Emily Carver. Emily, what are you arguing about this time?
Another brilliant show, Patrick. I don't know about you, but I've got a bit of COVID-related, a sense of deja vu today. Don't know if you've seen, but Italy have brought back mandatory testing, COVID testing for travellers from China. The UK are apparently considering it, or at least it's under review. I'm worried about this. I think this could lead us on a slippery slope back to lockdown restrictions and the like. I think we need to avoid the hysteria and be sensible about it.
All right, well, I hand you over now to Emily Carver.
Hello there, I'm Claire Nazir with your weather update. A rain warning has been issued for Northern Ireland and Scotland overnight, with a focused amber warning, so a higher risk of some high rainfall totals across southern Scotland. A snow and ice warning also for central and northern areas of Scotland. Now, low pressure clears to the north of the UK, whilst another one moves in from the Atlantic, allowing for some wet weather overnight, hence the reason why there have been warnings issued. So through the evening and overnight, cold across the central and northern areas of Scotland, watch out for ice, and a chilly night across eastern counties as more cloud arrives from the west. But look at this rain, it will be heavy, and it's tracking in quickly across Northern Ireland, Scotland, clipping the far north of England as well as the Isle of Man. Winds then will pick up to severe gale force across the North Channel, the far north of Irish Sea coast. Gales elsewhere associated with this rain across England and Wales, which again will track swiftly eastwards. So a wet and windy start to the day. Watch out for surface water issues. Obviously, some heavy bursts likely, but it will clear towards the east. In its wake, a few showers across Scotland, certainly for Northern Ireland as well. Still snow above around 200 metres, and we'll see a few running in across England and Wales, but here's some drier skies to end the day and blustery rather than those gales. Temperatures then on the mild side in the south, but still cold in the north, 6 or 7 degrees Celsius. Now through Friday evening, a legacy of showers continues across northern England, southern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. That rain continues also across the far north of Scotland for Shetland and Orkney, but it will clear. And then more persistent bursts of rain arrive from the southwest into the early hours of New Year's Eve. So some sporadic bursts of rain arriving and pushing ever northeastwards as we head through the day on Saturday. This rain again could be heavy in places. Again, the winds will pick up. Gales along the coast. but we could see some showers just later across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. All in all, an unsettled end to 2023. More rain on New Year's Day across more southern and eastern areas, drier on Monday.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good evening, it's 6 p.m. That means it's time for Jubes & Co. with me, Emily Carver. Now, it was rather hard to narrow down what I wanted to talk to my panel and you at home about this evening. There seems to be so much news knocking around, good, mostly bad. But I want to kick off the show by getting your views on something that I may actually have a bit of an unpopular opinion about. This is whether we should bring back mandatory testing for those arriving in this country from China. That's COVID testing, of course. Italy's done it, the US has done it, apparently Japan and India have also done it. Our government seems to be thinking about it, despite saying they weren't going to, only moments, if not earlier today. My view is that they should not give in to the pressure to be seen to act, not be swept up in a panic all over again, and avoid bringing back these types of rules. I don't think it will prevent variants from getting here. I don't think it'll save lives or protect our freedoms domestically. In fact, I think it will make it far more likely that we'll see a slippery slope back to the hideous lockdown restrictions we had